The story begins with Alan, our hero, facing a challenging situation. He has recently acquired a couple of adorable slave girls who are now questioning his intentions. Alan finds himself in a tough spot as he needs to answer their inquiries immediately. He tells them that his ultimate goal is to free the world from hunger. However, it's evident that Alan, like any other man, harbors intrusive thoughts about these girls. To understand how Alan arrived at this point, we are taken into a flashback. In this flashback, Alan describes seeing a pure white space before him, where a goddess appeared. Her smile was more beautiful than any human woman's he had ever seen. This encounter signified that he had passed away, but instead of fear or sadness, Alan felt excitement. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. After all, being reincarnated by a goddess is a common trope in most web novels. Alan's mind races with thoughts of being sent to another world where he will become the most powerful hero. He imagines being granted unique skills that no one else in that world possesses and using his newfound influence to engage in shady activities with cute girls. During this reflection, we learn that Alan was 30 years old at the time of his death and had never known the touch of a woman. This reincarnation feels like his chance to bid farewell to his innocence and become a true player. The goddess is pleased to see Alan awake, but she doesn't hold back in describing his past life as that of a total loser, especially regarding his relationships with women. Alan isn't happy to hear this, but he can't deny the truth in her words. Fortunately, Alan is somewhat accustomed to verbal abuse, thanks to his younger sister who used to mock him regularly. While it wasn't pleasant, it did help him develop a thick skin, so the goddess's harsh words don't affect him too deeply. Despite the goddess's blunt assessment of his past, Alan has more pressing concerns. He asks the heavenly woman who she really is. She reveals that she is an immortal being, revered as a goddess by the people of his world. Now that it's confirmed Alan is no longer alive, he eagerly seeks to understand how he died. The goddess explains that he collided with a girl who had fallen from a building, an impact that destroyed his spinal cord. This revelation triggers Alan's memory. He had indeed tried to save a fallen girl while returning home from overtime at his job. The goddess doesn't stop there though. She continues to mock Alan, saying he fell prey to the girl's soft body. She even smirks and asks if Alan enjoyed it. Alan is bewildered by the goddess's mockery. While he does appreciate the female form, he clarifies that in such a dire situation, he couldn't even register the softness of the woman's body. Ultimately, the encounter left him far from satisfied. Concerned for the girl he tried to save, Alan asks what happened to her. The goddess reassures him that the girl was saved, thanks to his body serving as a cushion. Relieved that his death wasn't in vain, Alan listens as the goddess reveals that she saved his soul to reward his good deeds. She intends to give him a second chance at life, which immediately makes Alan think about all the shady things he could do once reincarnated. The goddess reveals that Alan will be sent to a fantasy world of swords and magic, but there's a twist. Instead of being reincarnated into a new body, he will possess the body of someone already living in that world. Confused, Alan asks about the difference between this and a regular reincarnation. The goddess explains that in her realm, numerous reincarnations are happening simultaneously, but there aren't enough bodies to accommodate all the souls. To manage the influx of souls, she and other goddesses select existing bodies from the native worlds for the souls to possess, instead of reincarnating them as new individuals. Alan is puzzled by why the goddess refers to reincarnating souls as work, but she explains that managing all these souls is quite a burden. She then shows him the boy he will be possessing, who, coincidentally, is also named Alan. This new Alan has a handsome face and appears to be a young teenage boy. Alan feels a surge of excitement, convinced that with this body and face, he will easily attract all the girls in the new world. The goddess adds that she can finally grant him the wish he so desperately wanted, especially with that innocent body. Annoyed by her mocking tone, Alan retorts that she is toying with his emotions effortlessly and suggests she should toy with his brother instead if she's so keen. The goddess, able to hear his thoughts, asks if he wants to lose his life again. Alan, taken aback, protests that he didn't even say a word and accuses her of intruding into his thoughts. Alan then speculates that in this possession, his soul and the original Alan's soul will share the same body, resulting in two personalities within one person. However, the goddess clarifies that the original Alan's personality will cease to exist, making the scenario less interesting and more straightforward. She explains that the boy, a novice adventurer raised in an orphanage, is destined to die in a starting dungeon. Once his soul departs, our hero's soul will take over the body. Conflicted, Alan realizes he will essentially be hijacking another boy's body. This leads him to a grim speculation. If the boy's body is left in the dungeon, it might become monster food. Alan is apprehensive about possessing the body of a zombie, recalling how he was often called smelly in his past life. The goddess reassures Alan that he doesn't need to worry about becoming monster food or being left in a dungeon. She grants him a special privilege in this world, the skill of regeneration. This means Alan will be able to heal all his injuries and wounds, no matter how severe, making him virtually indestructible. She explains that the skill will activate the moment his soul takes over the boy's body, effectively making him a brand new person. Understanding now, Alan envisions the process of waking up inside another boy's body. It seems wild to him, as he will be cheating death continuously, defying the natural order of life. Essentially, he is being handed an Esther cheat skill to enjoy in this new world. His thoughts quickly turn to how he might use this skill to gain favor with women and fulfill his desires, typical for someone who has never experienced intimacy. With the explanations complete, the goddess asks if Alan has any further questions. He eagerly declines, eager to start his new life and conquer all the cute girls in this world. He sees no point in wasting time when a glorious future awaits him. The goddess understands and begins the process of his transition. Alan, bursting with excitement, declares his intention to become a harem king. He is then transported to the new world, but things turn out differently than he had imagined. 3 years pass, and despite his hopes and expectations, Alan remains untouched and is on the verge of setting a new record for how long a man can maintain his innocence. Not only has Alan failed to hold a girl's hand, but he also can't even have a proper chat with one. He feels as if he's stuck in a cruel joke or a bad dream. Adding to his frustration, there appear to be several miscalculations regarding his new life. First, Alan discovers that defeating monsters, even weak ones like slimes, is incredibly difficult. He admits that if he were to fight one, he would likely lose. Second, Alan learns that you can't acquire magic skills simply by leveling up. This is a significant disadvantage that the goddess forgot to mention initially, only revealing it later in a dream. This revelation crushes Alan's hopes of becoming powerful through magic. The one advantage Alan has is his regeneration skill, which doesn't require much mana and activates strongly. However, this brings him to his third point. It's impossible to disable his pain receptors. Although he can heal his injuries, he still feels all the pain they cause. This becomes evident when he runs away from a small slime, complaining about the unbearable pain. Essentially, Alan is like a loser in this world, and no one wants to take him as a companion. This brings him to his fourth point. He can't form a party. He prefers to keep his regeneration skill a secret and avoids using it in front of others. We see Alan use his heal skill, and as his wound disappears, he acknowledges that he possesses the power of a god in this world. The Holy Church considers self-healing a miracle art, and this church is a powerful and dangerous organization. Not only has it amassed wealth and authority, but it also has the potential to take over the political empire of the kingdom if it wanted to. Regeneration is a superior version of the healing power, so Alan is cautious about attracting the church's attention. This was his fifth miscalculation. Displaying his power too often could bring unwanted scrutiny from the church. Despite these setbacks, Alan refuses to give up. He believes that anyone else in his position would have overlooked these major details. Alan finally arrives at the place he has been wanting to visit for a long time, the slave trader's establishment. He admits that his brain might not have a lot of IQ points, but it did experience a flash of insight. Since he hasn't been able to find companions for his adventures, he decides he might as well pursue a slower-paced lifestyle. After all, he has saved enough money by working at a healing clinic for 3 years. With a slave, he will be able to issue any order he likes, and she will have to obey him. Moreover, due to the slave crest, he doesn't need to worry about the slave revealing his regeneration skills to anyone else. Alan believes this plan is perfect, and sees it as the beginning of his harem life. Alan enters the slave house and encounters the main slave trader, who looks quite intimidating and almost villainous. However, the trader politely asks Alan what kind of slave he is looking for. Knowing he can't appear uncertain, Alan maintains his stance but adopts a falsetto voice that makes him sound like a little girl as he requests to see all the slaves on sale. The slave trader gives him a quick tour of the available slave girls and then asks if anything caught his eye. Alan notes that the only thing that stood out to him was the exorbitant pricing of the slaves, with way too many zeros for him to count. Nonetheless, he was prepared for this, so he continues the conversation. He feels this is the moment to display his intelligence and attempt to bargain. Striking a confident pose, Alan asks the slave trader if he has anything else to offer. This startles the intimidating seller, but Alan's bluff seems to work. He declares his intention to buy the slaves that the trader couldn't sell. Admitting he has already seen everything, Alan understands it might be tricky for the trader to produce something new. He watches the clueless seller, hoping he has something else on offer. After an awkward pause, the slave trader decides to lead Alan to a shady area within his already shady store. Alan is shocked by the deplorable state of the hidden area within the slave trader's shop. He can't believe people are kept in such conditions. Among the battered slaves, Alan notices two girls who look particularly worse for wear. Their expressions convey that they've endured horrific experiences. Deeply disturbed, Alan asks the slave trader about these girls. The slave trader explains that the girl with the knife-like ears is an ancient elf, a superior breed of elves. The other girl is an elder dwarf, another rare species. Under normal circumstances, these girls would be special-rank slaves, commanding high prices. However, because of their battered and injured state, they are more affordable. Despite the high price that would deplete his savings in an instant, Alan resolves to purchase both girls, driven by a desire to restore their dignity. Alan completes the purchase and leads the girls away from the shop. Once they reach a secluded spot, the girls are understandably anxious, fearing that Alan might have unsavory intentions. He reassures them that he is not a creep and there is no reason to be afraid. Sensing their skepticism, Alan empathizes with their suffering and decides to demonstrate his sincerity. Using his regeneration skills, he heals them, restoring them to their prime form in seconds. The transformation is astonishing. The ancient elf is stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief as her body returns to normal. The elder dwarf, equally amazed, marvels at her fully restored hands. This miraculous recovery is a significant moment for the girls, but it places Alan in an unexpected situation. He had hoped to have cute companions for his journey, but now they are even more beautiful than he imagined, rivaling the goddess who sent him here. Overwhelmed by their beauty, Alan struggles to find the right words. The girls ask for his name, and in his nervousness, Alan bites his tongue while trying to respond. They watch, puzzled by their new master's fumbling attempts at communication. Realizing he needs to calm down, Alan takes a deep breath. After all, he finally has his harem in another world, and this is the beginning of what he hopes will be a grand adventure. Alan has finally achieved his dream. He feels that he will finally be able to live out his fantasies in grand fashion with his slave girls. Unfortunately for Alan, he had made a huge mistake by blowing all his life savings on these two girls. With no money left to even pay for an inn, he's been forced to live out in the open, inside a monastery deep in the mountains. As if that weren't bad enough, he also has to provide for his new slave girls, adding extra responsibility to his already dire situation. To put it bluntly, he's very broke and in desperate need of support. At this low point, the goddess reappears in his thoughts, mocking him for not planning ahead. Alan, frustrated, tells her that she can't just barge into his monologue just because she's a goddess. She retorts that it costs him nothing to have her in his thoughts, but Alan has had enough and tells her to get lost. All he wanted was to hear his slave girls praising him for his heroic acts, but his intrusive thoughts have led to his current lack of funds. Despite all his efforts, Alan continues to hold on to his innocence. The ancient elf is named Silfie, and the elder dwarf is named Noel. Both belong to extremely rare races in this world, making almost everything about them a mystery. This situation is exacerbated by Alan's inability to read or write the language of the new world. The goddess had left him a note suggesting he could learn the language himself, but Alan realizes there's much for him to understand in his appraisal scroll. Alan recalls that this is not the time to act like a loser and wallow in despair. He has a job to do and mouths to feed. Determined to make the best of his situation, Alan resolves to find a way to provide for Silfie and Noel, and perhaps, in the process, finally start living the life he had dreamed of when he first arrived in this new world. Alan decides to grow some food as soon as possible, thinking this will be an easy task since he has some knowledge of crop cultivation from his original world. As he begins implementing his methods, Silfie approaches him, curious about what he's doing. Mesmerized by her beauty, Alan momentarily loses his train of thought and gazes at her. Snapping back to reality, he explains that he's trying to grow some yams. Silfie, unfamiliar with the concept, asks what he means by this. Alan asks if she doesn't like yams, but she responds that she's more interested in knowing how he's going to grow them. Alan worries that Silfie won't want to eat yams grown by someone as inexperienced as him. He also feels that his slaves are unhappy with him as their master and desire to be self-sustainable. Unable to bear the humiliation of his own thoughts, he finds a way to walk off, leaving Silfie confused. Determined to provide for them, he rushes to town to buy some food, hoping the girls won't have to sleep hungry under the sky. Spending what little money he has left, Alan buys extra meat, hoping it will make the girls more appreciative and affectionate. He returns and offers the food to Silfie and Noel, who look wary but thank him. Despite his attempts to be kind, Alan senses that they still don't trust him. This troubles him because, at this rate, he will never be able to act out his fantasies with his slaves. He needs the girls to be open with him as soon as possible, but that doesn't seem likely at the moment. Alan needs to find some work to pay for his meals, but all he manages to nibble on is some bait. Determined, he heads to town, telling the girls to wait for him. This surprises them both. When he asks if they want anything in particular to eat, they both say no. This isn't helpful for Alan, as he doesn't know what to get them from the market anyway. Despite this, he decides to head off, leaving Silfie and Noel behind. Once he's gone, we finally get a glimpse into what the slave girls are thinking. Silfie can't believe that her master has just casually walked off and left his slaves by themselves. She confides that, despite having slave crests, it wouldn't be too difficult for her and Noel to break free, especially now that they've regained their original powers. She wonders if this is a ploy by Alan to test their loyalty. What confuses her even more is that he wanted to grow yams all by himself, unaware that she, as an ancient elf, has the magical ability to grow plants almost instantly. The appraisal scroll contains all this information about her powers, making Alan's actions puzzling to Silfie. She knows she could be extremely useful in growing food, eliminating the need for Alan to toil away like a laborer every day. All he needs to do is give her the order, and she will obey. Silfie is utterly clueless about her master. Despite his initial rescue and restoration of her body, she doesn't understand why he isn't exploiting them in the ways she had feared. This leads her to wonder if Alan has some other plan, perhaps intending to win over her and Noel with his seemingly genuine kindness. Alan, meanwhile, roams the town looking for work. He's torn between his desire to maintain some semblance of dignity and the pressing need to provide for himself and his new companions. Despite the goddess's mocking and his dwindling funds, he remains determined to find a solution. What Alan doesn't realize is that he has already earned a sliver of trust from the girls. Silfie's thoughts reveal a growing appreciation for her master's unexpected kindness, even if she doesn't fully understand his motives. Silfie didn't know that Alan was completely clueless in this world. To confirm her suspicions, she followed her master around town and noticed him working at a healing clinic to earn some money. She was amazed to see him healing a young girl but wondered why he wasn't using the restoration skill he had used on them. If the church were to learn about this skill, they would give him the highest post and honor in their office, ensuring he never had to worry about money again. As Silfie observed Alan, she became even more suspicious. His friendly chat with the girl made him appear angelic, which seemed too good to be true for someone who buys slaves. In this world, a person who owns slaves is not typically considered good, and the fact that Alan didn't demand anything from his slaves only added to the mystery. Silfie was frustrated that she couldn't decipher her master, even though he was a man of culture who enjoyed simple pleasures, like comparing a cloud to a girl's curvy body. 3 months passed, and Alan was still stuck doing the same old thing. The yams had finally been harvested, so he could treat his slaves to a new meal. However, Silfie was at her wit's end and asked him why he wasn't using her to grow his food. Alan wondered if his slave girls wanted to do farm work, but he didn't need them for that since he could use his restore skill repeatedly to gain stamina. Additionally, he wanted to brag about how he supported 2 rare species all by himself. He thanked Silfie for offering help but didn't seem inclined to ask for it. This was when Silfie decided to show off her own skills. She told Alan that her tree magic could harvest crops and proceeded to demonstrate. Immediately, Silfie summoned a tree filled with yams, shocking Alan like nothing else he had seen in this world so far. He took a moment to process what he had just witnessed, marveling at the cheat skills Silfie seemed to possess. He wondered if she had been hiding her powers from him all this time, while Silfie, on the other hand, believed that he had known about her abilities from the beginning. This was when it finally hit Alan that the slave girls and their powers must have been detailed in his appraisal scroll. Unfortunately, he couldn't read that piece of paper at all, which had led to his current predicament. Alan considered telling the girls the truth, that he was essentially like a child in this world who couldn't read or write. However, he couldn't bear the thought of admitting such a weakness. He felt that the girls already didn't think too highly of him, and confessing his illiteracy would only make it worse. He found the whole situation shameful. A man had to look good before his girls. Deciding that an awkward lie would be better than the humiliating truth, Alan quickly concocted a story. Striking a pose, he explained that magic was like a coin with two sides. Depending on the user, it could either be a cure or a curse. He claimed that this was why he had decided never to force others to use magic for him. If they were to use their powers, it had to be of their own free will. He added that the thought of being able to do anything he wanted was a dangerous one that could lead to serious issues. Of course, this was all a big fat lie. When he had bought the slaves, he had harbored all kinds of shady thoughts about what he could make them do, but a lack of cash had turned him into a laborer instead. Nonetheless, he smiled and told the girls that they should not force themselves to do anything with their magic. Finding the situation too embarrassing to continue, he excused himself and walked away under the pretext of harvesting. Silfie, meanwhile, began to think about her master in a different light. Initially, she had believed that revealing her magic would expose his true colors, expecting him to demand more from her. But his response, though suspect, made her reconsider her assumptions. However, Silfie began to feel she had been wrong to assume anything about Alan. Despite the change in his expression, it seemed that her magic had touched a deep wound in his heart. She thought that Alan was suffering from something profound, with the way he spoke to her indicating a past trauma. Silfie convinced herself that her master had experienced a similar struggle to her own, having lost himself to his powers of restoration, which might have led him astray before something changed his outlook on life. This, she believed, was why he was reluctant to flaunt his abilities. Her reflections brought back memories of when she used to flaunt her own powers, a time she now felt ashamed of. Determined to do something kind for her master, Silfie approached Noel and asked for some time to discuss their future with Alan. The very next day, Alan was astonished to find a whole collection of fruits and vegetables in front of him. To see so many plants grown overnight was clearly Silfie's doing, effectively a cheat code for agriculture. Although this was far more efficient than toiling away for hours, Alan felt as if his thunder had been stolen. He had secretly hoped to become a master cultivator using his earth knowledge, but Silfie's magic had outshone his efforts. Silfie greeted him and explained that she had decided to harvest crops for him. When Alan asked why she used her magic, Silfie made a cute face and asked if she had acted too hastily, even if it was of her own free will. Alan realized this was due to what he had told the girls the previous day. He wondered if Silfie was trying to find fault with him. Alan had hoped to leverage his knowledge to become unbeatable in the field of agriculture, but now it seemed futile. Furthermore, he feared that the girls might view him even more unfavorably, as he couldn't manage to use their powers effectively but still insisted on feeding them yams. This left him feeling both embarrassed and defeated. Alan decides to regain his composure and tells the girls they didn't need to go to such lengths. Silfie reassures him that it's fine, then she and Noel decide to make breakfast, likely to show their gratitude and be nice to their master. Despite their kindness, Alan feels like he can't show off to them anymore. However, he decides to make one last attempt to impress them. He explains to the girls that he has one more thing to flaunt, his knowledge of making concrete, an item that doesn't yet exist in this world. He hopes this will improve their living conditions and earn him some respect. The girls, curious, ask what he is doing. Noel, who is usually reserved and not keen on talking, shows up and tells Alan she can smell him making something. She expresses interest in helping and learning the process. Alan is surprised by Noel's sudden willingness to talk and help. She asks her master what he wishes to make, and he explains his plan to construct a building with concrete so they don't have to keep camping. When Noel asks what concrete is, he first uses the term cement, but she is unfamiliar with that too. He then explains that to make concrete, they'll need limestone, clay, and quartz. Noel listens intently, and Alan is pleased to see how responsive she is to his teachings. As time passes, Alan successfully teaches Noel everything he knows about building a structure. He emphasizes that while he has shared his knowledge, practicing it is an entirely different matter. Noel assures him that she has grasped the concepts and now wants him to sit back and watch her work. Noel proceeds to demonstrate her skills, using a spell called Extraction to summon all the raw materials needed for creating cement. Alan is astonished by her abilities, realizing that Noel possesses incredibly useful cheat skills. This revelation makes him feel even more insignificant, as it seems his contributions will be overshadowed. Next, Noel uses another spell known as Pulverize, which further impresses Alan. He watches in awe as she utilizes her fire and cooling techniques, eventually creating a whole pile of cement right before his eyes. To complete the construction process, Noel enlists the help of Silfie. This collaboration involves using bamboo shoots, an idea Alan had suggested with great pride, though now he feels his involvement is unnecessary. On the positive side, Alan notices that the girls have started to communicate more frequently with each other, forming a stronger bond. However, this also leads him to worry that his slave girls might find him useless if they continue to work well together. He fears they might build their own empire without needing him at all. Now that the house is built and ready for inspection, Alan is left speechless. Noel uses her heart and skill to ensure the security of the house, showcasing her mastery in building. Silfie, on the other hand, fills the bamboo sticks with mana to strengthen them, proving herself to be a mistress of plants. Both girls have demonstrated their formidable powers, leaving Alan in awe and somewhat disheartened. Alan had hoped to be the one impressing the girls, but instead, he feels as if they are taunting him by inviting him inside the house. He despised his lack of a cheat skill, yearning to be strong and flirt with cute babes. With the powers these slave girls possess, Alan worries about his future and his role in this world. Meanwhile, high up in heaven, the goddess is watching all the fun unfold through a goddess tablet. She comments that ever since Alan bought Silfie and Noel, he is destined to be worshipped almost like a demon king. However, she foresees that later in his life, he will be considered a threat by the hero of this world, leading him to a life full of ups and downs. The goddess finds Alan's predicament entertaining and decides she will make fun of him as many times as she can. She then corrects herself, saying she actually meant to check up on him as many times as she can. Recently, Noel's dwarf instincts had started to act up ever since she heard what her master, Alan, told her about cement and concrete. It was her first time experiencing such things, and she was genuinely surprised that Alan's advice turned out to be true. She followed his instructions and achieved exactly what she had hoped for. This confirmed to her that Alan was not just any random person who happened to buy her and Silfie. His restoration power was impressive, and the fact that he chose not to flaunt it made it even more remarkable. However, what stood out the most to Noel was Alan's lack of conceit despite his vast knowledge. He wasn't afraid to share this information, which made him a true catch in her eyes. The ability to teach an elder dwarf such useful skills brought her immense happiness. Silfie had also vouched for Alan, assuring Noel that they could trust him. This endorsement solidified Noel's decision to hold the same opinion. Noel decided that she, too, wanted to help alleviate her master's burdens and contribute to his plans. She admired Alan's wisdom and generosity, and was determined to prove herself as a valuable asset to him. Alan takes a nap, but when he wakes up, he is startled to see 2 more buildings standing in front of him. He can't fathom how this was accomplished so quickly. When Noel shows up, he realizes it must have been her doing. She explains that she built 3 buildings so that each of them can have one to themselves. The calmness with which the dwarf girl says such a thing is not normal to our hero. Noel steps closer to Alan, causing him to panic because he doesn't want his intrusive thoughts to take over again. She reiterates that she has built these houses for Silfie, Alan, and herself, but Alan can only think about how uncomfortably close Noel is to him. The dwarf girl then says that since she has worked hard, she would like her master to praise her efforts. Alan is taken aback by this request. Then, Silfie shows up from behind and asks him to praise Noel as well. Alan is surprised to see his slave giving him an order, and that's when he figures that the girls must be trying to gang up on him. He feels that the slave girls are attempting to use him for their own work instead of the other way around. He imagines a scenario where both Silfie and Noel mock him for having nothing to boast about apart from his restoration skill. He realizes he has no money, no talent, and is rather incompetent in many ways. They add further insult to injury by calling him a skinny nerd with no experience with women. Suddenly, the goddess joins the girls in their mockery of Alan. In Alan's imagination, she joins in, further roasting him. He believes the girls were so worried about his intrusive thoughts that they decided to build extra houses to stay away from him. Alan imagines they see him as a shameless pig who wants to do shady things to them. His thoughts spiral out of control until Silfie asks if everything is okay, snapping him back to reality. Realizing he has let his imagination run wild, Alan quickly plays off whatever was going on in his head. He has come this far and is determined not to back down now. He is in a position to praise Noel for her hard work, which means he can pat her on the head as much as he wants. This makes him happy because he can at least touch his slave girl now. Alan proceeds to pat Noel on the head and thank her for her service. This makes her extremely happy, and she smiles to let her feelings be known. Her hair is very smooth and silky, more than enough to get Alan worked up. He finds her so cute that his thoughts begin to purify in this moment. Silfie can see how happy the dwarf girl is and feels a bit jealous. Noel starts to blush, so Alan gives her a bit of a push to make her feel even better. However, Silfie did not expect Alan to get so intimate with his slave after having the houses built. She reminds herself that she is an ancient elf, an elite species. She resolves to stay true to her kind and not get worked up over a simple pat on the head. Despite her resolve, she decides to increase the number of plants she has harvested so far, hoping this might earn her a pat on the head as well. She tries to convince herself that she has no ulterior motives, but it's too late for that. Months pass, and Alan is seen tending to crops by himself once again. It's as if he has forgotten about the powers of his slave girls, leading Silfie to wonder why he doesn't utilize her and Noel's abilities. She explains to us how magic is divided into 5 attributes: fire, water, wind, metal, and earth. Silfie has an evolved wind attribute that pairs with an aptitude for plants. Noel has aptitudes for fire and metal, with an attribute for earth. This makes them the perfect combo, combining food and dwelling, which is amazing for someone like Alan. However, he has never forced them to use their magic against their will, allowing them to use it whenever they feel like it. Silfie muses that Alan isn't blinded by desires, but the reality is quite different. Alan simply lacks the courage to engage in anything shady with his slaves. She comments that he seems to avoid conflict altogether, preferring to stay away from any sort of stress. This leads Silfie to wonder if her master actually wants to live a life of isolation. The only obsession she can discern is his peculiar fondness for yams. Otherwise, he appears to be an exceptionally nice guy. Despite this, Silfie is certain that Alan must have some unspoken desires. She is determined to uncover what her master truly wishes for. Silfie resolves to find out Alan's true feelings by confronting him directly. She knows that his choice of rare species like herself, and Noel suggests loneliness, is not the issue. When she approaches Alan and demands to hear his intentions, he hesitates. Silfie presses him, asking why he bought her and Noel and expressing her desire to understand his real motives. Alan struggles with his response. He knows that the truth is simply that he had hoped to indulge in unspeakable things with his slaves, but there is no way he can admit that. Faced with Silfie's questioning, along with Noel's similar inquiry, he realizes he must provide some kind of answer. Silfie points out that both she and Noel are among the rarest species in the world, possessing powers beyond imagination. Despite this, Alan only utilizes their abilities to address minor deficiencies in his life. Silfie is eager to understand if there's any specific need for their extraordinary skills. For Alan, this is a perplexing question. He enjoys an abundant supply of food and a set of comfortable houses. His situation is as good as it gets. Yet, the girls seem unable to grasp this. To Alan, the reason for his kindness is simple. They provide him with food and shelter through their powers. He doesn't see the need to exploit their full potential because, despite being their master, he doesn't want to feel useless. He's not preparing to battle any demon lords, nor does he require them for any grand adventure. In fact, if the girls requested something as humbling as having him lick their feet, he would likely comply, though he would find it oddly enjoyable. Now, faced with the need to offer a plausible explanation, Alan realizes he must craft a lie that will keep the girls intrigued and content. He needs to balance the truth with a story that will satisfy their curiosity and maintain their interest in their relationship with him. Silfie decides to demonstrate her magical prowess with the tree, hoping to impress her master and make him recognize how valuable she can be. Noel follows suit, showcasing her high-speed refining skills. However, Alan misinterprets their displays. Instead of seeing them as efforts to prove their utility, he feels that they're trying to undermine his self-respect. If this is indeed their aim, he decides he might as well confess his true feelings and lay it all out. Overwhelmed by his own desires and intrusive thoughts, Alan contemplates exposing his darker side. He wrestles with the idea of admitting his true intentions but ultimately chooses to state a nobler goal aloud: his desire to rid the world of hunger. This declaration shocks both Silfie and Noel, who are not expecting such a lofty reason. On the outside, Alan smiles, but inside he is tormented. He berates himself for his cowardice, wishing he could be more honest and self-assured. He reflects on how, if he weren't the eldest son in his family, his self-loathing might have consumed him by now. Silfie contemplates Alan's confession, coming to the realization that his ambition to eradicate hunger is an ideal so grand it seems almost divine. Such a lofty goal is not something one would typically admit so freely, but hearing it clarifies much of Alan's behavior. She understands now why he treasures the yams he cultivates. These plants are not just a source of personal pleasure but hold the potential to alleviate starvation, even in the most desolate areas. This revelation also sheds light on the occasional, inscrutable expression on his face, which Silfie now attributes to his distant and profound vision for the future. Turning her gaze to Noel, Silfie acknowledges that their master harbors an extraordinary ideal, one so far-reaching that even their rare and powerful selves could scarcely have conceived it. Despite the risks inherent in placing their trust in him, Silfie recognizes that she has never encountered a man like Alan in her entire life. With a sense of resolve, she decides to stand by him, expressing her desire to follow him and support his grand vision for the world. If his primary goal is truly to bring this vision to life, then she wants to be there with him, witnessing and contributing to his quest. Silfie suggests that they need to expand their land cultivation efforts. She's clearly attributing more to Alan's motives than what he might deserve, as he's primarily been focused on his own, more self-serving desires. Despite this, Alan agrees to her proposal, still baffled at how a flimsy excuse managed to work so well in his favor. For the first time, he has managed to make progress in the eyes of his slave girls, but he realizes he must now stick to this fabricated story if he hopes to keep Silfie and Noel by his side. Alan reflects on his belief that there are two types of people in the world: winners and losers. Winners lead and plan, while losers follow and get exploited. He recalls his school days when he was frequently bullied, particularly by a girl named Mizuki who would steal his food. Whenever Alan complained, Mizuki would justify her actions by claiming she needed the extra food because she was growing. Mizuki was his little sister, and the fact that even she could bully him speaks volumes about his gullibility. As Alan reminisces about his past and wonders how Mizuki is faring in his original world, he feels the weight of his old life pressing down on him. He has left behind that world, only to find himself in a new one where even his slaves, Silfie and Noel, seem out of reach. His deep thought is abruptly interrupted as Silfie and Noel call out to him repeatedly. Alan snaps back to the present, panicked by how deeply he had drifted into his past as an escape from his current reality. Silfie insists once more on the necessity of cultivating more land if they are to tackle the issue of world hunger. Alan agrees, all the while internally berating himself for fabricating such a grand lie when his true desires were far less noble. The goddess appears again, adding her own layer of mockery to the situation. Silfie, focused on practical solutions, contemplates how to efficiently grow multiple crops. Meanwhile, Alan questions why she hasn't yet discovered his real intentions. If she were as perceptive as he believes, she should have caught on to the dubious nature of his claims. This uncertainty fuels his self-doubt, making him worry that the slave girls are accepting his false narrative too readily. He fears that, instead of being the master, he might end up being manipulated by them. As his anxiety spirals out of control, Alan's mind conjures all sorts of negative scenarios. He feels that perhaps some knowledge from his past life could be applied here, and he starts plotting how he might use it to turn the tables on his slave girls. In reality, however, these thoughts are purely imaginary. Despite his worries, Silfie and Noel genuinely appreciate him and their current situation, leaving Alan to grapple with his own baseless fears. Alan suggests to Noel and Silfie that their focus should shift to making fertilizer. Unfamiliar with the concept, the girls listen as he explains that fertilizer is crucial for growing crops on barren land. While Silfie's tree magic is a powerful tool, it may not be a long-term solution, so an alternative method is necessary. Silfie agrees, recognizing that using fertilizer would not only conserve her mana but also improve the flavor of their crops, allowing her to save her energy for more critical tasks. Alan then introduces the concept of crop rotation, explaining how it can help them grow different plants according to the seasons. He envisions bringing in cattle to graze the soil, which would provide a valuable source of natural manure to enrich the land. This could spark an agricultural revolution, transforming the way they cultivate plants and potentially revolutionizing the world of farming. Determined to assert his role, Alan announces that he will need to make hatchets and other tools to expand the farmland. Silfie's reaction is one of awe, indicating that he may have finally impressed her. However, Alan's confidence is tinged with worry. He begins to doubt whether he is coming across as too boastful, fearing that his display of pride might be off-putting. After all, he reasons, no one would want to spend too much time with someone as vain as he imagines himself to be. Suddenly, Noel steps closer to Alan and tugs at his sleeve, visibly impressed by his recent achievements. Eager to learn, she expresses a desire to master the art of making hatchets and other necessary tools. Her enthusiasm is palpable, but it stirs a sense of unease in Alan. He fears that her eagerness might overshadow him, reminiscent of how, in his past life, any loss on his part would have easily been turned into someone else's gain. Now, in his new life, he feels the same apprehension regarding his slave girls. For a brief moment, Alan contemplates asserting his authority, thinking he should handle these tasks himself, given his position as the man of the house. However, Silfie dismisses his thoughts, suggesting that there is no need for him to act out. Her casual tone and dismissive attitude leave Alan bewildered. She treats him almost as if he were a petulant child, and her playful behavior, tapping him on the nose and calling him a good boy, makes Alan feel like he's a character in some romantic comedy. This is not the image he had in mind when he envisioned his role as the master of his own harem. Noel clings to Alan's arm, demanding a detailed explanation about the fertilizers. As he feels her soft body pressed against his arm, his intrusive thoughts begin to stir. Struggling against the temptation, he eventually relents and decides to share everything he knows about fertilizers with the girls. Alan begins his detailed explanation, emphasizing the importance of 3 key nutrients for plants: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphoric acid. He launches into a lengthy discourse on how these elements, combined with Silfie's tree magic, will enable them to accomplish their agricultural goals. Noel listens with rapt attention, her fascination growing as she perceives Alan's explanations as almost mystical, likening them to something out of Galileo's work. Though Alan himself doesn't grasp the reference, he's pleased with her enthusiasm. When mealtime arrives, Alan is served a bowl of yam soup, a dish he enjoys immensely. Silfie is about to call Noel to join them, but before she can, Noel appears with a sense of excitement. She announces that she has something to show before they eat. To Alan's astonishment, Noel has already produced the hatchets and other necessary tools, along with the fertilizer. She admits to experimenting with different ratios to find the optimal mix, and now she's meticulously documenting her findings for future reference. Alan watches in amazement, impressed by how quickly and efficiently Noel has managed to create the fertilizer. Her dedication and speed lead him to believe that she might very well be a reincarnation of Galileo himself. Noel enthusiastically remarks that Alan's work will become much easier thanks to the progress they've made, but her words fall flat. Instead of basking in the glory of his modern knowledge, Alan finds himself overshadowed by Noel, who has taken charge of manufacturing and cultivation with Silfie's tree magic. This leaves Alan with the less glamorous tasks of reclamation and logging, essential, yet menial jobs that he compares to those given to background characters and stories. Alan reflects on this with a touch of frustration, likening his situation to that of Big G from a popular kids' show, who was relegated to similar duties. He resents the thought of being cast in such a role, especially since he believes he should be leveraging his cheat-like abilities to secure a more prestigious position in this new world. As he observes his slave girls, who eagerly await his praise, he feels a pang of self-doubt. It seems that Noel and Silfie have effortlessly relegated him to basic chores, intensifying his insecurities and making him question his own value and role in their dynamic. Alan, despite feeling somewhat exploited, decides to commend Noel for her excellent work by patting her on the head. Internally, he laments that as the master, he should command more respect and not be relegated to such a passive role. Nevertheless, he finds a strange comfort in the softness of Noel's fluffy hair, and this small act of affection brings him some solace. Observing the tender moment, Silfie feels a twinge of jealousy, but quickly chastises herself for becoming so emotional. She reminds herself that Alan's praise is simply a gesture of thanks for Noel's hard work and shouldn't affect her so deeply. Deciding to restore balance, Silfie interrupts the moment and suggests they all break for lunch, postponing further cultivation work until the afternoon. Alan agrees without hesitation, and the trio sits down to enjoy their meal together. As Alan savors his soft and flaky yams, Silfie comments on his curious nature. She acknowledges that his ambition to eliminate world hunger, although seemingly impossible at their current level, is truly admirable. What had impressed her most was Alan's knowledge about fertilizer and crop rotation. Alan is gradually becoming an inspiring role model for his slave girls, though he remains deeply insecure about his own abilities. Silfie reflects on how Alan's methods could significantly increase food production with less effort. Such efficiency and productivity are rare in their world, suggesting that Alan's knowledge and education far surpass what is typical here. Silfie sees her master as an ideal figure, someone who, despite long periods of solitude, is determined to realize his dreams. However, the reality is that Alan is merely a teenage boy wrestling with intrusive thoughts and shyness. Despite this, Silfie believes that Alan's decision to purchase her was driven by the recognition that an ancient elf with her tree magic could control plant growth with remarkable ease. Yet, Alan does not force her to work or use the slave crest, which she finds incredibly respectful. This trait of valuing her independence is noteworthy to Silfie. As Silfie muses aloud about Alan's curious nature, he asks if she was speaking to him. Quickly changing the subject, she offers to serve second helpings. Alan, now preparing for the next phase of cultivation, finds that the hatchet Noel made for him is exceptionally smooth and efficient, making his task significantly easier and more manageable. Alan presses on with plowing the fields, considering expanding his efforts to other areas as well. Despite things not unfolding as he had envisioned, he is content with the fact that he can sustain himself and his slave girls. His confidence remains high, believing that he will eventually achieve his dream of having a harem. Utilizing his regeneration skill to avoid exhaustion, Alan is grateful for this powerful cheat. He knows that this ability not only preserves his vitality, but also allows him to make any type of soil fertile. Though he acknowledges that this skill is his own creation, he remains discontented with his single, untouched status despite his advanced knowledge and regeneration ability. As he continues plowing, Alan hopes for praise from his slave girls for his hard work. While he finds joy in patting them on the head and showing appreciation, he longs for the same gestures of acknowledgement in return. This amusing cycle of restoration persists well into the evening, showcasing the impressive results of cultivation made possible by his regenerative powers. Noel is profoundly impressed by her master. She sees the dedication Alan puts into his goal of ending world hunger and believes that if he continues working at this pace, he will surely achieve it. Noel feels that her role as an elder dwarf is integral to realizing his dream. However, she finds it curious that Alan has entrusted both her and Silfie with such critical information. Given how easy it would be for them to misuse this knowledge, she wonders if Alan truly believes they won't betray him. As Noel ponders this, she recalls that Alan has yet to issue a single order to her or Silfie. This realization leads her to conclude that Alan wants them to collaborate with him to make his ideals a reality. The trust he has placed in them is evident in the way he has shared valuable information with both the ancient elf and the elder dwarf. Swearing on her name as an elder dwarf, Noel commits to supporting Alan's vision until the end. Silfie, too, shares this sentiment, admiring her master's remarkable qualities. She remarks on how incredible Alan is and expresses her desire to contribute fully to his cause. Silfie suggests taking independent action, which aligns with what Alan seems to want from them. However, the actual actions Alan secretly desires from his slave girls remain far less innocent than their current efforts, as they observe him laboring diligently. Silfie and Noel, both resolute in their commitment, vowed to do everything in their power to bring Alan's dream to fruition. Alan, oblivious to the depth of their resolve and what they are truly promising, continues his relentless toil in the fields. Later, the mischievous goddess reappears, ready to tease Alan once more. She mocks him for his perceived laziness and ineptitude, pointing out that despite his hard work, he still seems unable to earn affection from his slave girls. She chides him for squandering his free time and not making better use of his slaves. Alan, clearly irritated by the goddess's taunts, asks her to stop ridiculing him, especially when he's trying to enjoy a moment of solitude with his thoughts. Taking this opportunity, Alan decides to address a question that has been nagging at him since his reincarnation. He inquires if all the other goddesses are as bitter and mocking as she is. The goddess chuckles and explains that his choice to be reincarnated in this manner meant he was destined to deal with her particular brand of mockery. It's her role to ensure she keeps up the jabs. Alan can't deny the truth in her words. With Silfie and Noel handling all the cultivation and housework through their magic, he finds himself with an unusual amount of free time. The goddess is confident that Alan's intrusive thoughts and shady intentions will remain unfulfilled, leaving him to grapple with his own fantasies. The goddess's remarks stir up Alan's intrusive thoughts, momentarily rekindling his inner agitation and bringing a burst of vitality to his otherwise monotonous existence. Alan, feeling a sudden burst of restlessness, questions why he seems to be living like a retired old man with no personal interests or hobbies. Frustrated by his idle state, he resolves to make something happen. He rushes to Noel, eager to engage her in a new project. With a spark of excitement in her eyes, she asks what her master needs. Alan hands her a blueprint, explaining that he wants her to create the item depicted. Noel examines the blueprint intently, moving closer to Alan in the process. He can't help but notice the softness of her arm against him, though he's puzzled by her proximity. As Noel pores over the details, Alan realizes that she might be so absorbed in the blueprint that she hasn't noticed his presence. Noticing that the blueprint lacks specific dimensions, Alan mentions that he forgot to include them. He instructs Noel to make the item large enough to fit on top of a table, glossing over the fact that he hasn't specified exact sizes. The truth is, Alan's inability to read or write in the world's language has left him unable to provide precise measurements. This small but significant detail remains hidden from Noel, who, focused on the task, doesn't question the vague instructions. The blueprint, though nothing more than a simple illustration, stirs a mix of curiosity and apprehension in Noel. As she examines the design, she's eager to tackle the project but wants to understand its purpose. Her master's vague response about it being something he requires makes him visibly nervous, which only piques Noel's curiosity further. Alan, trying to bolster Noel's motivation, emphasizes that the item will bring joy to both her and Silfie. He sells the idea as a means to foster interaction and create shared experiences. With enthusiasm, he reveals that the object in question is simply a board designed for games like chess and Jenga. The plan is for Alan and his two slave girls to engage in these games, hoping that shared enjoyment will lead to more conversation and bonding. In truth, Alan's underlying motive is to use these games as a pretext for more elaborate punishment games, which would allow him to navigate around certain rules and potentially earn some R-rated rewards. It's a scheme driven by his intrusive thoughts, masked under the guise of innocent fun. Noel, captivated by the idea of playing games with her master and Silfie, eagerly agrees to start working on the board. However, Alan's plan might be more transparent than he realizes. The goddess seizes the opportunity to mock Alan for his convoluted and questionable strategy. Silfie observed from the doorway, her gaze fixed on Alan and Noel busily working away in the workshop. The sight of them focused on what seemed like strange, unfamiliar items sparked her curiosity. Alan was talking about board games like chess and Jenga, terms that were completely foreign to Silfie. Her mind raced with confusion as she tried to reconcile these recreational activities with Alan's lofty goal of eradicating hunger. It struck her as odd to see him diverting energy towards something she couldn't grasp, especially when such serious work lay ahead. Determined to understand more, she decided to interrupt. The games, while intriguing, seemed out of place to her, given the gravity of their mission. She felt a pressing need to ask Alan for clarification. As Silfie entered the room, her eyes locked onto Alan's. The unexpected warmth of his smile and the invitation to join them only deepened her suspicion. It was as if his usual appearance of a lazy young man was a mask, hiding something much more profound beneath. Silfie couldn't shake the feeling that the real Alan, having endured much and gained great power, was more than he let on. She saw him not just as a young man with ambitions, but as a sage with a good heart, whose true nature remained shrouded in mystery. This realization ignited a new sense of purpose within Silfie. She resolved to be a source of strength for Alan, ready to embrace his plans and support him unwaveringly. The three of them settled around the table, with the games neatly laid out before them. Noel's eyes sparkled with excitement as she eagerly expressed her desire to learn how to play. Alan, equally enthusiastic, suggested starting with Reversi. He began to explain the rules, his face lit up with anticipation. As Alan outlined the game's mechanics, both Noel and Silfie listened intently. Silfie, in particular, found herself captivated. She marveled at how simple the rules were to grasp, yet how they allowed for a rich array of strategic possibilities. Watching the pieces arranged on the board, she envisioned a future where this game would enchant people of all ages, drawing them in with its engaging challenge. It felt like a hidden treasure, and she was amazed that Alan had shared it with them so openly. But just when they thought they were about to dive into a regular game, Alan's eyes gleamed with mischief. He proposed a little twist to spice things up. Instead of just playing for fun, they'd place a bet. The winner would get to give the loser any order they wanted. Silfie could tell this was going to be interesting. Silfie felt a surge of nerves, but she reassured herself that Alan wasn't just in this for a bit of fun. She had a hunch that somehow, this game was connected to his larger goal of ending world hunger. Her thoughts were interrupted when Noel suddenly chimed in, insisting that they both needed to give it their all. Silfie agreed with Noel, and together, they prepared to face off against Alan, certain that it would be an enjoyable challenge. After some negotiations, Alan declared that they'd begin with a game of Reversi. Silfie couldn't help but wonder how they were supposed to stand a chance. Alan had created the game, after all, and knew all its rules inside and out. It seemed like a bad move on their part. The game started, and to Silfie's surprise, Alan began making questionable plays, ultimately losing the match. It became clear to Silfie that Alan hadn't even intended to win. He had deliberately thrown the game, leaving them in the position to give orders to their master. Noel was thrilled by their unexpected victory. Without hesitation, she told Alan that she wanted ownership rights to all the recreation items. Silfie, on the other hand, saw an opportunity and requested to be registered at the Merchants Guild. Alan was relieved that Silfie and Noel hadn't asked for their release from slavery, but he had something else brewing in his mind. He wanted to trick them into something more adult-oriented. He thought it was a genius move, the ultimate strategy. Later, Silfie registered at the Merchants Guild while Noel joined the Alchemists Guild. Alan then suggested that, since they were in the Imperial capital, they should do some shopping. Silfie was pleased to see Alan enjoying himself for once. 2 weeks passed after their registration, and during that time, Alan became deeply engrossed in shogi training. He set up some rules for Silfie, who listened with amazement. As they played, she remarked that it was a great warm-up exercise for the mind. Alan, however, was losing badly and interpreted her comment as a subtle jab at his weakness. Silfie won the game and nervously smiled, saying it was a fantastic way to de-stress. Alan, trying to save face, insisted that he hadn't been playing seriously. As they finished up, Noel reminded Silfie that they needed to head to the capital. Alan told them to return before dinner but was left stewing in disappointment. He still hadn't figured out how to get closer to his slaves in the way he wanted. He mused that maybe alcohol would help, but just as he was scheming, the goddess appeared, interrupting his thoughts. She bluntly pointed out that Alan wasn't reliable, which is why his slaves were leaving the house to work. She also scolded him for being short-sighted, thinking that games like shogi and Reversi were enough to keep his slaves entertained. Alan's mind raced with paranoid thoughts, imagining his slaves selling themselves off to someone else. Panic set in, and he sprinted towards the capital, chastising himself for being such a lousy master. When he finally found Silfie and Noel in the capital, he anxiously offered them anything they wanted. Silfie, overwhelmed with emotion, began to tear up. Alan, completely taken aback by her tears, assumed that they must have had a hard life and had been holding back their emotions all this time. Alan decided it was time to withdraw some money from his account. When they arrived at the bank, Silfie and Noel asked the manager to reveal Alan's bank balance. Alan's heart nearly stopped. He was bracing himself for bad news, but when he heard the number, he was floored. He had 3 million dol, roughly 300,000 yen. He couldn't believe his ears. As it turned out, his recreational games had become wildly popular in the capital, and his slaves were the ones behind it all. Silfie explained that he'd been earning royalties from all the sales. Overjoyed, Alan excitedly announced that they should go on a shopping spree. However, Silfie and Noel had already beaten him to it. They'd bought more slaves for him. The new additions introduced themselves, and Alan, suddenly feeling a bit overwhelmed, realized what kind of situation he'd gotten himself into. Silfie, noticing his unease, told him that he should act as the village chief of slaves. After becoming the owner of 50 more slaves, Alan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a good decision or a disastrous one. He couldn't help but place the blame on Silfie and Noel for getting him into this situation. Just a few hours earlier, Silfie had struck a deal at the slave market, using her sharp negotiation skills to drive down the price. She had pointed out the wounds on the slaves, arguing that if she didn't buy them, their upkeep would cost the owner more in the long run. With no other choice, the owner caved. Alan had been impressed, thinking Silfie had handled the negotiation as easily as taking candy from a child. She managed the entire situation so smartly that Alan nearly teared up, overwhelmed by how beautiful and intelligent she was. Lying on the bed, Alan felt like things were moving too fast for him. He realized he needed to come up with a new strategy to handle everything in the future. Meanwhile, Silfie was worried about whether Alan had noticed any weaknesses during her dealings with the merchant. She recalled how kind Alan had been to them, even while playing recreational games. She knew that despite his attempts to keep a tough exterior, Alan couldn't hide his compassion and warm heart from them. This side of Alan was endearing to her, and she wanted to keep it a secret. In a world where slaves were often exploited, Alan had accepted them with an open heart. Silfie felt that she and Noel could at least do this much for someone like Alan, who was determined to rid the world of hunger. Outside Alan's room, Silfie hesitated before asking if they could come in. Alan, still lost in his thoughts, replied with a yes. As they entered and saw him lying on the bed, he quickly told them not to be nervous and to make themselves comfortable. Noel assured him that they were okay, but Alan started sweating, worrying that maybe they didn't want to spend time in a guy's bedroom or that his room might have a foul smell. Desperate to ease the tension, he complimented them on their success with the recreational items, but after noticing their expressions, he added that if they were tired, they should just rest. He told them that as their master, he was proud of them. However, deep down, Alan felt a bit conflicted, thinking his slaves had somehow stolen his achievements right out from under him. He decided to put off his plans to do anything adult for the time being, but he still had his eye candy and inadvertent touching strategies in mind. This time, though, he was determined to hold back his temptations. He knew he needed to make a lasting impression on his slaves quickly, but he also realized he had to be careful about how he went about it. Noel suggested that Alan should use the money to quickly release them from their slave crests. Silfie agreed, adding that they had earned a substantial amount of money and didn't need any praise for it. She implied that their work was more than enough, which Alan took as a sarcastic remark. Feeling the weight of their intense stares, Alan grew a bit nervous but had a plan brewing. He told them he needed to share his plans going forward. He explained that they would first treat the money spent on each slave as their debt. Once this debt was repaid, they would remove the slave crests. To make this feasible, he outlined that they would pay wages with the money and ensure that each girl wouldn't suffer while repaying the debt. Instead, they should focus their efforts on agriculture and commerce. Everyone would contribute their labor, which would be converted into money and merchandise. Silfie was taken aback by this idea. Alan felt a rush of satisfaction, thinking his master plan would ease his duty to provide for 50 slaves, making it a smooth transition. He named the plan Slaves' Debt Repayment Restructuration. He asked his slaves for their thoughts on the plan, but Noel and Silfie raised some serious questions. They wanted to know if Alan truly intended to free them after repaying their purchase price and if he really understood their worth. Silfie suggested that Alan reconsider his plan, pointing out that if his goal was to eradicate hunger, he would need more talented personnel. She admitted she couldn't quite grasp the plan's feasibility. Noel echoed her concerns, and both wondered about Alan's true intentions. Little did they know, Alan's real motive was to experience the true joys of adult life with Noel and Silfie. Alan, nervous but determined, offered a reassuring smile and started to bluff. He claimed he didn't want to exploit their status as slaves. Instead, he desired comrades who would willingly stand by him. His grand plan involved Noel and other dwarves using their alchemy to produce farm tools and fertilizers. Meanwhile, the elves would enhance crop productivity. There was also a secret component to the plan: cooking. By leveraging these 3 pillars and utilizing the Merchant's Guild, he aimed to develop new products and procure funds. Alan decided to call his plan Alan's Mix. Silfie was thrilled by the plan. She imagined how utilizing the elves' unique traits could boost the productivity of growing yams, wheat, and soybeans. Alan, still unsure if his ideas were making sense, was interrupted by Silfie's reaction. She admitted she hadn't expected him to surprise her in this way. Silfie declared she would allow herself to act as she pleased, and Noel agreed. Alan felt cornered, doubting whether his dream of living a good life would ever become a reality. As Silfie's excitement waned, she regretted her earlier reaction. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Noel, noticing, checked on her. Silfie assured her she was okay, then stepped out for a drink. Her mind, however, was clouded with thoughts of Alan. As she mulled over the plan, she realized that Alan's intentions did make sense. His goal to eradicate hunger was genuine, and he had saved the girls using restoration without asking for anything in return. This act of kindness was truly remarkable. Back inside, Noel and Silfie discussed how perplexed the newly bought slaves seemed. It was proving challenging to explain Alan's plans to them. Silfie felt the need to keep an eye on Alan's acts of kindness, worried that he might inadvertently charm the other girls. She thought this process would help others see Alan's kindness, generosity, and intelligence. Noel interrupted her thoughts, prompting Silfie to brush off her earlier concerns and focus on explaining the plan to the new slaves. Silfie and Noel approached the newly acquired slaves, explaining that they would be receiving salaries for their labor. Silfie invited any questions they had. The slaves, while appreciative, were filled with confusion and questions about the seemingly favorable conditions. Some were hesitant to doubt their master, who had saved them. Silfie reassured them that this was simply how Alan operated, and they should get used to it. One of the slaves, an elf named Aura, asked if she could call Silfie just Silfie instead of Lady Silfie, which Silfie agreed to. Then Aura asked if Silfie was suggesting that they didn't need to service Lord Alan, meaning they wouldn't have to surrender their bodies to him. Silfie recognized Aura as a high elf and was pleased to find such an elf among them. She replied with a resounding yes. Other elves chimed in, expressing that it would be a disgrace if they were not desired for their beauty, given how aware they were of their allure. One elf then asked if Alan was interested in women. Silfie recalled an awkward moment when Alan had looked at her chest, back, and legs. Lost in her thoughts, she was jolted back by the questioning elf. Silfie quickly assured them that Alan wasn't the type to hurt others without reason. The elf implored her to act as if she was being deceived, to which Silfie responded that if Aura was going to that length, she should also mention that Alan appeared to be kind. This piqued Aura's interest, and she wanted to learn more about Alan. Aura, the newly bought high elf, was a vision of beauty with a hefty dose of narcissism. Once a proud and self-absorbed individual, her time in captivity had scarred her deeply. When she had been imprisoned, she had even gone so far as to burn her own skin, preferring a tragic end at the hands of a lowly merchant rather than living as a slave to an unknown man. Yet now, as she watched Alan plowing the land under Silfie's watchful eye, she found herself pondering her fate. Alan's peculiar sensibilities struck Aura as odd. To her, he seemed like a weirdo, but she couldn't deny the impressive power of his restoration magic. Silfie had told her that although Alan might play the fool, they would come to understand him better. Still, Aura struggled with the notion that Alan would remove their slave crests only after they repaid their debts. It seemed absurd to her, considering how his restoration had returned them to their full potential and skyrocketed their market value. Despite her initial aversion, Aura couldn't help but entertain thoughts of giving herself to Alan if he was the one who healed her heart's defect. These thoughts made her incredibly aroused. Earlier, when Aura had asked Silfie if Alan was interested in women, Silfie had been reminded of an awkward incident where Alan had looked at her chest and legs. This made Silfie blush, and her reaction only intensified Aura's curiosity and arousal. Aura wondered if Alan's intention was to make her fall for him. Determined to find out, she resolved to make a bold move. However, she first needed to greet Alan in the morning. As she imagined Alan toiling hard for attention, Aura suddenly noticed that Alan was fixated on her. She wondered if he had overheard her thoughts, and if she had inadvertently angered him. Alan stopped plowing and stared at Aura intently, which secretly pleased her. After a moment, Alan surprised Aura by asking her to play a game of Reversi. Aura was taken aback, struggling to believe what she had heard. Alan's serious demeanor suggested that even though Silfie had manipulated him into becoming a village chief, he still had self-respect. He was irritated, thinking that Aura was adding fuel to the fire because he was perceived as merely a plowman. Despite his internal conflict about touching Aura's voluptuous figure under the guise of the game, he dismissed concerns of being labeled a pervert by his slaves. Alan, the chief of the village of slave elves, assured himself that his nightmares wouldn't come true. He reminded himself to act prudently in the future, as he had barely managed to restrain himself from staring at Aura's legs. He told Aura that he wanted to see her true abilities and suggested that they compete seriously. The winner of the game would have the right to give the loser one order. Alan was determined to make the most of the situation, envisioning himself gazing at Aura's impressive figure without so much as a blink. He compared Aura's ample assets with Silfie's more modest but shapely form, and found himself losing his mind over the difference. Aura's allure seemed to combine the charm of a pop idol with the demeanor of a prideful noble daughter, a captivating blend of purity and libido that left Alan both mesmerized and dazed. Confident in his abilities, thanks to the training with Silfie and others, he was sure he'd come out victorious. However, as the games began, Aura's prowess quickly became evident. She bested Alan in Reversi, then in Shogi, and finally in Jenga. Thoroughly embarrassed and feeling smothered by her skills, Alan claimed he hadn't been serious yet. Turning to Silfie and Noel, he complained that Aura didn't want him to win at all and was essentially bullying him. Aura found his complaints endearing and cute, but she was puzzled by Alan's claim that he had been playing dumb despite asking her to take the game seriously. As the victor, Aura pondered what order she should give Alan. Noel praised Aura for her performance, noting that she had completely failed in the games. Aura was confused and wondered how she had failed. She questioned if her actions had been too forceful, or if she had let her guard down against her master. It dawned on her that she might be playing right into Alan's hands, finding him more formidable and terrifying than she had anticipated. Silfie chimed in, agreeing with Noel's assessment. She warned Aura that approaching Alan with half-hearted intentions would lead only to disappointment and potential harm. As an elf herself, Silfie understood Aura's feelings but stressed that the one who falls in love first is always at a disadvantage. Aura was taken aback by Silfie's insight and brilliance, acknowledging that no one could replace her. Despite this, Aura felt invigorated by the challenge and was eager to rise to the occasion. She assured Silfie that she would take the warning to heart. Meanwhile, Alan's mind was in turmoil after his defeat at Aura's hands. He felt like a mere punching bag for her. Just then, the goddess intervened, noting that there was a lot of talk among the slave girls about Alan. According to the goddess's world, Alan ranked as the number one person they would least want to be reincarnated as. The goddess found Alan's plight amusing, and his frustration only added to her enjoyment. She taunted him about the negative remarks circulating among the slaves, and Alan, feeling thoroughly embarrassed, begged her to stop. He admitted that he had no stopgap measures to counteract the situation. In an attempt to address the dissatisfaction and regain some semblance of control, Alan issued his first order as village chief. He lifted the ban on slaves playing games and reduced the required time for manual labor. However, this decision led to unintended chaos. With the ban removed, every elf wanted to challenge Alan to a game, a request fueled by suggestions from Noel, Silfie, and Aura. This constant barrage of games turned into a form of torture for Alan, as he lost every single match. He couldn't refuse the challenges, as the elves framed their requests as opportunities to deepen their friendships. Silfie's strategy of integrating games as a bonding activity had indeed been a resounding success. The slaves now had a shared topic of conversation: how hopelessly inept their village chief was. Despite this, they expressed their gratitude sincerely, and communal harmony was at its peak. Nevertheless, Alan couldn't ignore the underlying dissatisfaction. Watching the elves work, Alan felt increasingly useless. Aura, for example, used her limitless tree formation skill to facilitate rapid germination and growth. Silfie and Noel applied their wind and soil magic to accelerate the development of crops, rendering Alan's efforts practically obsolete. The elves managed everything, from planting to harvesting, with such efficiency that Alan's contributions felt entirely redundant. Heartbroken by the apparent lack of respect, Alan begged the elves to let him participate in the harvesting process. They insisted he rest and enjoy the fruits of their labor, dismissing his offers to help. The elves used wind magic to streamline post-processing and harvesting, making Alan's presence seem even more superfluous. Frustrated but unable to voice his discontent to the beautiful elves, Alan resolved to take action. He knew he had to prove his worth and regain control of his role. Determined not to be overshadowed by the elves' magic, Alan vowed to himself that he was just getting started in his reincarnated life, and that he would have the final say in the end. Noel, Silfie, and Aura gathered in the kitchen, curious about Alan's sudden call for a meeting. Alan announced that he wanted to try out a new recipe, prompting Silfie to suggest that if he was hungry, he could ask someone to prepare something for him. However, Alan had something more ambitious in mind. He wanted to make his food so irresistible that the girls would be hooked, unable to live without it. He expressed his preference for them to help with this task. With that, everyone got to work. Silfie used her wind magic to thinly slice the yams and inquired about the next steps. Alan thanked her and turned to Aura, who had used wind pressure to extract soybeans, resulting in soybean oil. Both Silfie and Aura were amazed by the process, marveling at how efficiently the oil was produced. Alan asked them to remove the leaves from the soybeans to use as fodder, and they were astounded by the practicality of the method. Alan, enjoying the process, was pleased with how his modern knowledge was making a difference in his new life. Aura asked about the magic Alan used to make the oil, and Noel interjected, saying that Alan hadn't used any magic, but had merely observed. Silfie added that Alan couldn't use magic, which struck a nerve. Aura, unaware of Alan's limitations, was surprised by this revelation. Although Silfie's comment was honest, she felt she had awkwardly exposed too much. Alan, feeling a bit hurt but hiding it, continued to focus on the task. Noel, losing interest in the activity, was nudged by Silfie to stay engaged. Noel agreed to heat the oil and demonstrated her unique talent. Normally, dwarves excel in manipulating metals, but Noel also had a great aptitude for fire. She quickly heated the oil to the perfect temperature, impressing Alan with her efficiency. Despite feeling a little redundant, Alan pushed those thoughts aside and showed them how to fry the chips. He submerged the sliced yams in oil heated to 170 degrees Celsius and sprinkled some salt. When the chips were ready, Alan presented them proudly, but the girls stared at the new creation with curiosity, unsure of what to make of it. Aura picked up a chip and took a bite, her eyes widening in delight at the unexpected burst of flavor. The simple yam, fried in oil and seasoned just right, was surprisingly delicious. She admitted that she might become addicted to these chips. Alan basked in the compliment, pleased with her reaction. Silfie, eager to try, grabbed a chip and tasted it. Her eyes lit up with amazement, and she quickly declared that the chips would definitely sell. Alan felt a surge of pride, thinking that Silfie's merchant's intuition had confirmed his success. However, Noel's reaction remained reserved, leaving Alan unsure of her opinion. He hoped that her silence meant she also enjoyed the new recipe. With a sense of anticipation, Alan announced that it was time for the main dish, bread. Aura, somewhat skeptical, asked if bread was the dense, unappetizing staple food she had heard about. She admitted that she couldn't imagine it being tasty but was willing to give it a try. The other girls shared her curiosity. In this world, bread was traditionally baked without fermentation, resulting in a rather bland flavor. Alan introduced a bowl of grape skins to the girls, leaving Silfie puzzled about what he planned to do with them. He placed the skins in a container, added water and sugar, and shook it well. Alan, eager to impress, prepared to reveal a little trick. Using his innate skill of restoration, Alan applied what he referred to as dark magic to the container. This technique was crucial in creating yeast extract. The girls were intrigued, confused by the fact that Alan, who claimed he couldn't use magic, was performing something so magical. Alan maintained his calm demeanor, using the opportunity to pique their curiosity further. He clarified that although he couldn't use traditional magic, his innate restoration ability allowed him to manipulate substances in unique ways. He explained that what he called dark magic was simply a form of restoration he had recorded in his mind, not true magic as they knew it. When Alan was reincarnated into his new world, the goddess visited him in a dream to provide an additional explanation for his skill. It was an unusual time for such a visit, but the goddess began with an apology. She explained that while Alan's transmigrator's privilege, the restoration skill, was indeed top tier, its effectiveness was limited due to his low specs. To illustrate, she compared his situation to having a state-of-the-art operating system running on a computer with only 8 megabytes of RAM. Alan, feeling the sting of her analogy, asked her to stop using such harsh mechanical terms that made him feel inadequate. The goddess quickly shifted her focus to the topic of restoration, explaining that the skill was a polyseme, meaning it encompassed various meanings she had infused into the power granted to him. For example, Alan could record any magic he saw or heard once and restore it at any time. Although he found this skill intriguing, it came with conditions. The goddess clarified that due to his poor memory and body, he could only record a single instance, with a restoration time limit of just 30 seconds. Additionally, he could only restore things that preserved a material form. The goddess, while explaining, continued to make fun of Alan and berate him, leaving him feeling as if she had only come to scold him. As Alan reflected on the goddess's words, she departed from his dream, noting that morning was approaching. He shared the details of his magical skill with Silfie, who was both surprised and curious. She wondered why Alan had chosen to focus on magic that turned spoiled things into useful materials. Alan clarified that it wasn't about spoiling but about fermentation, which was crucial for making bread. The girls, intrigued by the concept, expressed their curiosity about fermentation. Seeing their cute, eager expressions, Alan felt excited and decided to teach them. He explained that fermentation was essentially the controlled process of spoiling, which humans had learned to harness for various beneficial purposes. In bread making, yeast ferments the sugar in the dough, producing carbon dioxide and alcohol, which gives the bread its fluffy and soft texture. The girls were fascinated by Alan's detailed explanation. Aura, in particular, was so impressed with his knowledge that she began to worship him, marveling at his expertise. Alan's earlier feelings of self-pity began to fade as he found renewed confidence in the girls' swift mastery of the skills he had taught them. To his astonishment, the girls, who he initially believed were only proficient in tree, wind, and metal fields, demonstrated their versatility by making the bread fluffy and perfect. The goddess's earlier words echoed in his mind, and he felt a pang of defeat, vowing to demand betterment from her all night. To his surprise, the goddess responded with a blush and expressed excitement about how Alan's persistence would keep her awake, teasing him with playful banter. Alan, initially taken aback, quickly realized she was merely jesting and smiled at her affectionate demeanor. As the goddess bid him farewell, Silfie inquired about their next steps. Alan took charge, instructing the girls to knead the dough while it was warm, shape it, ferment it again, and then bake it with fire magic. The bread, once completed, was met with awe from the girls. Silfie exclaimed that the experience was transformative, not an exaggeration at all. Alan felt a deep sense of satisfaction, reflecting on how far he had come since his reincarnation. The joy of putting smiles on everyone's faces was profoundly fulfilling. Despite this newfound happiness, Alan's lingering desire for something more exciting and adventurous gnawed at him. His longing for action, driven by an unfulfilled craving, persisted. As two dwarf girls entered the kitchen, curious about Alan's activities, he seized the opportunity to celebrate. Embracing the festive atmosphere, he announced a bread festival for the day, eager to share the joy and success of their culinary achievement with everyone. Silfie marveled at Alan's impact on the community. In a world where good food was scarce, Alan's efforts had opened hearts that had previously been closed off.
His approach, marked by kindness rather than coercion, had won over even the most reluctant individuals. The success of the bread and potato chips, key components of Alan's grand plan, was a testament to his special charm and innovative ideas. Silfie pondered the countless trials and errors Alan must have faced to perfect the fermentation skill, and resolved to exceed his expectations, driven by admiration and determination. Aura, savoring the freshly baked bread, had undergone a shift in perception. Initially dismissive of Alan's lofty goal to end hunger as mere delusions, she now saw his knowledge and vision as genuinely revolutionary. Her pride as a high elf compelled her to reciprocate Alan's generosity. She was determined to harness her full power to support him and see where his ambitions would lead. Noel, too, was touched by Alan's selflessness. As she bit into the bread and reflected on Alan's genuine desire to spread knowledge and provide for others, she felt a rush of emotions. Despite not being as perceptive as Silfie, Noel's admiration for Alan grew. She wanted to prove her worth and make Alan proud by contributing her best efforts, especially in crafting and creating. Yet, as night fell, their shared thoughts of appreciation and commitment were abruptly shattered when a sinister turn of events occurred. Alan was kidnapped. Noel and Silfie decide to take a trip to a fashion outlet in the market, strutting confidently in their boldest outfits. Meanwhile, the boutique owner, lost in her thoughts, wonders what kind of customers might stroll in today. When she finally turns around, she's practically floored to see Noel and Silfie standing there, looking absolutely stunning. She can't believe her luck and wondered how did such gorgeous women end up in her little rundown boutique. But then, she spots the slave crests on them, and the fantasy of wealthy patrons is slightly shattered. Alan, who's with them and clearly trying to play it cool, asks the owner to show them some clothes that would suit the girls. The funny thing was that Alan doesn't have the slightest clue about women's fashion. The owner, noting his young age, assumes Alan must be rolling in money to afford such high-quality slaves. Seizing the opportunity, she pulls out the most dazzling, jaw-droppingly expensive outfits she has. As Noel and Silfie try on the jewelry-studded clothes, they look absolutely captivating, so much so that the owner is practically hypnotized by their beauty. She can't help but brag that the dresses are imported from another country. The girls, however, find the outfits heavy and impractical for everyday wear. Sensing the impracticality and perhaps the weight on his wallet, Alan asks the owner to show them something more down to earth. While Alan admires the glamorous clothes, he's fully aware that his wallet isn't up to the challenge. The owner, not knowing Alan's financial situation, obliges and brings out some regular attire, the kind worn around the capital. Noel and Silfie emerge from the changing room looking adorable in a simple, yet stylish, city girl look, a swaying apron paired with a fluffy, light skirt. Alan finds the outfits cute and much more fitting, but then comes the price tag, $120. Alan's heart skips a beat, and he quickly shifts gears. In a swift move, he dives into the second-hand items cart, where, with a sly grin, he uses his restoration magic to renew some old clothes. The owner is completely taken aback, wondering how she missed having such high-quality clothes in her second-hand stock. But it's all Alan's doing. His restoration magic has turned old rags into something fresh and new. He proudly presents 2 shiny new dresses to Noel and Silfie. With their great-looking outfits in hand, the trio leaves the boutique, with Alan grinning from ear to ear, pleased with his clever shopping tactics. Not only did he save money, but he even snagged some coupons. As they exit, the owner can't shake the feeling that Alan is destined to shake up the market in a big way. Her instincts are right on the money. Soon enough, Alan ends up with 50 more slaves, and the rest, as they say, is history. Alan, with a spark of mischief, decided to try something new. He used dark magic to ferment bread. When he handed the freshly made bread to his slaves, they couldn't help but jump for joy after tasting it. Their happiness was contagious, and Alan felt a strange satisfaction, knowing he'd tapped into the darker side of magic, and he even got a glimpse of the forbidden fruit. Later that day, they all gathered to play board games. Though Alan lost most of them, he didn't mind one bit. He was just thrilled to be closer to the girls, savoring the sweet scent of their perfumes as they laughed and teased him. As night fell, Alan lay in bed, feeling content and hopeful for another fantastic day ahead. But then, in the quiet of the night, he heard a rustling sound. His heart raced as he imagined this might be the night when things would finally heat up. Nervously, he wondered which of the girls might have been impressed by his bread-making skills. Was it Silfie, who seemed to enjoy it so much, or Aura, who was always so bold and might actually make the first move? Or maybe it was Noel, who devoured the bread like she couldn't get enough. With these thoughts racing through his mind, Alan tried to calm his nerves, deciding that tonight could be the night he might lose his V-card. But despite the rustling sounds getting louder, he kept his eyes shut, determined not to give in to temptation. He braced himself for whatever might come next, thinking about how this could be the start of something, until he felt something unexpected, a rope tightening around him. For a moment, Alan thought maybe he was in for a wild night, even wondering if this was how things were going to go down. But when he finally opened his eyes, the reality was far from what he imagined. Standing before him was a girl with a stunning figure, but only the upper half of her was human, the lower half was that of a giant spider. The spider girl smiled sweetly, asking if she had woken him up, while poor Alan lay there, sweating bullets, utterly speechless. With a calm but firm voice, she told him to stay quiet, quickly sealing his mouth with her silky threads. Alan's mind raced. He couldn't decide if he was more terrified or impressed. Despite the fear, He couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was, but he also wondered what she planned to do with him. She reassured him not to worry, saying she had no intention of eating him. Before Alan could process any of this, their strange encounter was interrupted by a loud explosion that blasted through the wall. The spider girl turned calmly, remarking that they were out of time for any leisurely chat. In a swift motion, she lifted Alan in her arms, wrapping him completely in her silk threads, leaving only his eyes exposed. Pressed tightly against her chest, Alan found himself feeling oddly comforted, like a baby being cradled. In that moment, he completely forgot he was being kidnapped, too overwhelmed by the warmth and softness enveloping him. The spider girl, with Alan tightly bound in her silk, leaped out of the room amidst the chaos of explosions and effortlessly landed on the roof of the house. Down below, Silfie, Aura, and Noel, the ones responsible for breaking into Alan's room, were left staring up in shock. The spider girl, perched confidently on the rooftop, couldn't resist taunting and mocking them, relishing the moment. Silfie demanded the immediate release of Alan, while Aura, with a determined edge, threatened the spider girl, reminding her that she was outnumbered 3-1. Noel, more diplomatic, suggested it would be wise for the spider girl to surrender herself. The spider girl acknowledged the power of the girls, but made it clear that she wasn't interested in a fight. She apologized for the inconvenience before making a swift escape, leaping off the building and heading straight for the jungle. The girls stood there, stunned by the spider girl's incredible speed. As she disappeared into the dense forest, a smile played on her lips. This was her home turf, and she knew she could easily evade the elf girls. Despite their commands for her to stop, she felt confident in her ability to outsmart Alan's slaves in the forest's depths. Meanwhile, Alan, still pressed against the spider girl's chest, couldn't help but wonder how this kidnapping had been so quick and easy. He had expected his girls to put up a strong resistance, maybe even engage in a fierce battle, but there had been none of that. The ease of it all made him question if his slaves had staged a fake resistance or, worse, if they had abandoned him altogether. But then again, he doubted they were such good actresses. As he tried to process the situation, he found himself distracted by the softness of the spider girl's body, a bizarre contrast to the miserable circumstances he found himself in. Eventually, the spider girl reached her destination, deep within the forest. She gently dropped Alan to the ground, where he wriggled like a worm, still covered in her silk. Panic began to set in as he asked her what she wanted from him, his voice tinged with fear. He screamed and begged for her to untie him, but his pleas were in vain. No matter what he tried, he couldn't free himself. As the reality of his situation started to sink in, Alan realized the gravity of his predicament. His captor was an Arachnne, a creature from Greek mythology known for their mastery in weaving. This wasn't just any kidnapping, he was in real danger. The spider girl finally revealed that she had brought him there because someone desperately needed healing. As Alan had suspected, it was his skills they were after. He wondered how word of his abilities had spread, but quickly recognized that his restoration skill was the only thing he was really known for. Feeling a mix of fear and frustration, Alan realized that if he wanted to survive this, he'd need to find a way out. But his thoughts kept wandering, distracted by the odd, almost comforting sensation of the spider girl's soft body. The spider girl, Neck, calls out for her sister, Ra, to join them. When Ra emerges, she can hardly believe what she's seeing. Her older sister has actually abducted someone. Ra quickly tries to ease the tension, apologizing to Alan for Neck's actions. Alan, still wriggling on the ground like a helpless caterpillar, is utterly captivated by his luck. Not only has he encountered one beautiful woman, but now there are two, and they're sisters to boot. He finds himself oddly fascinated by Neck, who, despite her sadistic streak, is undeniably beautiful. Meanwhile, Ra radiates a confident and determined aura, both in her mind and body. Ra reassures Alan, telling him not to worry, they have no intention of hurting him. She even promises to release him immediately, much to Neck's dismay. Neck tries to argue, but Ra quickly silences her, asserting control over the situation. As this unfolds, Alan notices something disturbing. Ra has an injured eye that's still leaking fluid, and she's also missing 3 of her spider legs. The sight makes his stomach turn, but he tries to stay focused. Neck, sensing her sister's pain, leans in close to Alan, her face inches from his, and asks him to heal Ra. Alan's mind starts to wander, and he muses about the idea of having a girlfriend with a bit of an attitude. However, the reality of having someone as intimidating as Neck so close is more terrifying than he'd like to admit. Healing Ra seems like an easy task, but Alan worries about what might happen to him afterward. He's restored lost body parts before, but the underlying threat in this situation has him on edge. As the sisters argue amongst themselves, Alan weighs his options. Despite his fear, he decides to help Ra. However, he's not going to do it without setting some boundaries. Out of caution, he asks Neck if he can clarify a few things first. Ra dismisses his overly respectful tone, but Alan presses on. He assures them that healing Ra won't be difficult, but warns that they must not harm his family or his girls. If they do, he promises to show them no mercy. His bold statement catches the sisters off guard, and for a moment, they're shocked into silence. Suddenly, Alan's thoughts are interrupted by the playful prodding of the goddess in his mind. She finds the whole situation hilarious and can't resist teasing him. Annoyed, Alan mentally tells her to leave him alone, insisting that he's in the middle of a serious and cool moment here. Ra, curious about Alan's mention of his family, asks Neck for more information. Neck reassures her sister, explaining that she hasn't harmed anyone. She kidnapped Alan and brought him here, but that's as far as it goes. Alan, still cautious, asks if he can really trust her. Neck, with a solemn vow, swears by her sister that no harm will come to his loved ones. The goddess, still finding Alan's attempt at heroics amusing, continues to poke fun at him, but Alan is too irritated to care. He demands that she leave his mind once more, determined to focus on the task at hand. Alan, after weighing his options, finally agrees to heal Ra, but with one crucial condition: she must swear a spirit's contract that she won't harm Silfie or the others. Ra, trusting Alan's intentions, agrees without hesitation, but Neck immediately objects. Neck argues that if Alan's slaves decide to attack, they need the freedom to defend themselves. She flatly denies Alan's condition, but Alan can't help but smirk at her resistance. Neck, clearly annoyed, demands to know why he's smirking, but Alan's thoughts are elsewhere, racing through the recent events with a creeping sense of doubt. He starts to wonder if his slaves might have already lost interest in him. The ease with which he was kidnapped, the lackluster effort they put into rescuing him, it all seems like a bad play, as if they were just going through the motions. He recalls moments where he might have been too full of himself, thinking he could have everything served to him by the girls just because he was their master. Maybe it was his arrogance after making that bread or his obvious lusting after their bodies that finally pushed them away. As these thoughts swirl in his mind, Alan starts to tear up, feeling a deep sense of shame and regret. Maybe he had taken their loyalty for granted, and now he was paying the price. Despite his emotional turmoil, Alan bravely stands his ground. He tells Neck that she must accept his condition, no matter what. With newfound resolve, he explains that just as Neck treasures her sister, he also has people who are important to him. Without a guarantee that Neck won't turn on his girls after he heals Ra, there's no way he'll proceed with the restoration. Meanwhile, Silfie and the other girls are furiously planning their rescue mission. Silfie is filled with guilt and frustration, cursing herself for failing to protect Alan. She knows that Alan is practically useless when it comes to offensive magic, and as his shield, it was her duty to keep him safe. But she had failed in that role, and now Alan was in danger because of her mistake. Noel suggests calling for help, but Aura quickly points out that their best option is to summon the elves. The enemy retreated into the forest, and the elves are masters of that terrain. Aura also mentions the crest she noticed on the spider girl, identifying her as a commander under the demon lord of lust. In this world, 7 deadly sins are governed by 7 demon lords, each with their own underlings. Even though they're facing one of these underlings, the girls can't shake the feeling that they shouldn't have lost so easily. Aura, recalling the spider threads they had encountered, realizes the enemy had cleverly prepared an escape route. The Arachnne had woven her threads throughout the forest, making it almost impossible to track her down. To make matters worse, the Arachnne can see in the dark, giving her an even greater advantage. Silfie, acknowledging their disadvantage in the forest, admits they'd likely lose to the Arachnne on her home turf. But she isn't without a plan. Silfie reveals that she had secretly placed a leech seed on Alan as the spider girl fled into the forest. This magical seed would allow them to pick up on sounds and track Alan's movements. Just as she explains this, they begin to hear noises through the leech seed. Aura grows anxious, worried about Alan's condition in the forest. She insists that they need to come up with a strategy quickly. As they listen closely, Aura and Silfie are surprised to hear Alan's voice. But instead of panic, Alan's tone is calm and polite. Confused, they wonder why he's being so courteous and suspect that he might be trying to buy time. They decide to keep listening, and soon they hear Alan firmly stating that he will show no mercy if the spider girl intends to harm his family. This declaration makes both Aura and Silfie blush as they imagine Alan, normally so meek, now angry and determined, standing up to the spider girl. Silfie's eyes start to well up with tears as she realizes how much Alan has always put their safety before his own. Hearing Alan say that he would refuse to heal Ra without a guarantee that the spider girl wouldn't harm his girls touches Silfie deeply. Driven by this newfound resolve, Silfie quickly orders the dwarves to protect the village and gather up the Arachne's threads. She then turns to the elves and Noel, instructing them to come with her. With unwavering determination, Silfie declares that they will bring back Alan, their master, safe and sound. She rallies everyone, and with a fierce resolve, they set off to rescue him, vowing to return with their beloved master. Alan, still tightly bound in spider silk and wriggling on the ground like a helpless worm, tried to negotiate the terms of his release. The whole situation felt absurd to him. Here he was, a grown man wrapped up like a mummy, trying to bargain his way out of captivity. But just as he thought things couldn't get any more bizarre, Neck, the spider girl, suddenly announced she had new conditions. To Alan's shock and fascination, Neck separated her human body from her spider half and stepped out, revealing a stunningly beautiful woman. Alan was both creeped out and mesmerized by the sight. He had always had a thing for monster girls, but this was on another level. His mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. Sure, he was into monster girls, but that didn't mean he was some weakling who got excited over everything. Besides, Alan had no idea how to handle a situation like this, especially with a spider girl who could detach from her spider body. Neck, now in her human form, approached Alan with a seductive smile. She put forth a proposal that shattered any mental barriers Alan had left. She offered to let Alan do whatever he wanted with her body in exchange for healing her sister, Ra. The casual way she offered this left Alan completely unprepared. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to resist the temptation that was now right in front of him. He knew he had to stay strong. Alan had been determined not to give in until he got a guarantee for Silfie and the others' safety. But Neck wasn't making it easy. She poked his face playfully, her touch both gentle and suggestive, as she tried to seduce him. Neck even offered to make a spirit pact with him, sweetening the deal. Alan found himself in a tricky spot. He wondered if he could really follow the rules of the pact and still give in to this temptation. His mind flashed back to when Neck had carried him into the forest, her soft body pressed against his. The memory was vivid, and Alan knew he was teetering on the edge of giving in. In a desperate attempt to calm himself, Alan suddenly remembered his sister, Mizuki, from his past life. He recalled the time she had caught him watching some adult content and had scolded him, telling him that instead of wasting money on such things, he should spend it on her or else she would cut ties with him. Mizuki's argument had been so reasonable that it snapped Alan back to reality then, just as it did now. He remembered how his income had been so low that he had ended up making Mizuki work a part-time job too. Back then, he had almost lost sight of what was truly important because of temporary satisfaction. This memory grounded Alan, reminding him of his priorities. As tempting as Neck's offer was, he knew he had to resist. The stakes were too high, and he couldn't afford to lose sight of what really mattered, protecting Silfie and the others. Alan, finally regaining his composure, took a moment to think clearly. He knew he had to prioritize three crucial points. The first was his own safety. Although currently bound and at the mercy of the spider girls, he decided that this could be dealt with later. In the worst-case scenario, he could always use his restoration skill on himself, even if he found himself on the brink of death. The second point was far more pressing, the safety of Silfie and the others. Their well-being had to be his top priority, and he knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The third point was whether to use his restoration skill on Ra. Despite his initial hesitation, Ra seemed gentle and harmless, making Alan believe that healing her wouldn't pose much of a risk. It was the second point, the safety of Silfie and the others, that weighed most heavily on his mind. As Alan considered these points, Ra noticed his nosebleed and suggested he breathe through his mouth instead. Her unexpected kindness threw him off momentarily. She seemed so gentle, a stark contrast to the danger surrounding him. This made his decision to heal her seem even more reasonable. However, before he could act on that thought, Neck leaned in closer, inspecting Alan's nosebleed with a mix of curiosity and disgust. Unlike her sister, Neck found the sight rather gross, pulling back slightly. Just as Alan was about to respond, Neck suddenly tensed, her attention snapping upward toward the sky. Something had clearly caught her attention, and the air around them grew tense. She muttered something about supporting Ra but needing to step away, and without further explanation, she began to leave, her focus still on whatever she had sensed. A surge of panic hit Alan as he noticed something strange in the sky. A massive, glowing sigil had appeared, radiating an ominous energy. It seemed to be some sort of barrier, and its sudden appearance filled him with dread. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, a flash of light and a rush of wind swept past him. In an instant, Silfie, Noel, and Aura were standing before him. He could hardly believe his eyes. His companions had come to rescue him. They quickly apologized for their delay, and Aura, typically so composed, smiled at him with a cute, reassuring expression that made him feel safer despite the chaos surrounding them. With a wave of her hand and a murmured incantation, Silfie effortlessly freed Alan from the spider's threads. The silk dissolved around him like mist. Alan was awestruck by her display of power. It was undeniably impressive, and he couldn't help but think that he should have been able to do something like that himself. As he stood up, Silfie thanked him for buying them time. She explained that because of his actions, the barrier spell, four-sided sacred trees, was still intact, keeping the enemy at bay. Alan, still processing everything that had happened, was confused. He hadn't realized a barrier had been cast. As he looked around, he noticed the elves gathered in a corner, working on something he couldn't quite make out. Their mysterious actions added to the eerie atmosphere, making him feel uneasy. Standing close to him now, Silfie gently plucked another spider thread from his hair. As she did, she blushed slightly and stared at him with a soft, almost tender expression. She thanked him for having faith in her, expressing how much it meant to her. Alan, still disoriented from the events, was touched by her words but couldn't fully grasp their significance. Before he could respond, Neck and Ra suddenly reappeared. Neck, seemingly amused, remarked that she had figured out Alan had been pretending to be clueless just to buy time. She expressed her surprise, noting that she initially thought Alan was genuinely composed, only to realize he had been acting with that cute face of his. This unexpected turn of events left Alan once again trying to make sense of the rapidly changing situation. As the tension between the two groups escalated, Silfie's annoyance became evident. She turned toward Neck, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she taunted the spider girl, suggesting that Neck had given up on escaping. The atmosphere grew even more charged as Alan's companions and the Arachnne sisters stood face to face, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Alan, as usual, had no idea what was truly going on, but he decided to roll with the situation. Realizing that his earlier negotiation attempts had been less than stellar, he thought it was time to bluff his way through. Slipping into his Kira persona, he confidently declared that everything had gone according to plan. The statement took everyone by surprise. Silfie, Aura, Noel, and even Neck seemed momentarily shocked by Alan's sudden display of confidence. The atmosphere, however, felt a little off to Alan. Something about the way everyone reacted didn't sit right with him. Neck was the first to break the silence, acknowledging Alan's nerve with a smirk. She even suggested that she might need to reevaluate her opinion of him, raising her estimation by a few points. Surprisingly, Silfie, Aura, and Noel followed suit, expressing their admiration for Alan's apparent cunning. Aura, with a hint of affection, even confessed that she was falling for him all over again. Alan was thoroughly confused but found himself enjoying the unexpected praise. Inwardly, he reveled in the approval, letting the flattery wash over him like a warm tide. But amidst the praise, a nagging thought tugged at his mind. He wondered why had Silfie and the others come to his rescue in the first place. It must have been a hassle to track him down, and he wondered if their actions were driven by a sense of duty or perhaps some deeper, maternal instinct. Despite his confusion, Alan decided to accept the situation for what it was. He thought that if they wanted to help him, who was he to question it? Feeling on top of the world, Alan's confidence soared. With newfound bravado, he joined Silfie and the others, mocking the spider girls and declaring that the tables had now turned. The three girls stood proudly beside him, their confidence mirroring his own. Alan, emboldened by the support of his companions, declared that they could finally negotiate on equal terms. The intensity of the situation didn't escape him, but he welcomed it, thinking that it was about time things got serious. Even the barrier spell impressed him, though he had little understanding of its true nature. Neck, however, wasn't one to be easily outdone. With a playful smile, she agreed to the deal Alan had proposed earlier, allowing him to do whatever he wanted with her, but on one condition. Alan couldn't lay a hand on Ra. Ra immediately tried to protest, but Alan's mind was already spinning with the potential advantages of this deal. He reiterated his primary request, asking Neck to promise not to harm Silfie and the others in exchange for his restoration skill on Ra. He added that justified actions would be allowed and suggested they could work out the details together. Neck listened carefully, a slight frown forming as she weighed the terms. She acknowledged that the deal seemed overly favorable to Alan's side, but she also admitted that it might be the price of a miracle. Not wanting to be tricked again, Neck asked if Alan's terms included anything concerning her body. Alan, caught off guard by her directness, realized that Neck had seen through his earlier plan. Silfie, Aura, and Noel immediately turned their gazes toward him, their expressions filled with suspicion and disgust. They were clearly wondering if what Neck was implying was true. Feeling the pressure mount, Alan scrambled to wriggle out of the situation, hastily denying the accusations. His mind raced, realizing that he needed to add more demands to his deal to avoid looking suspicious. Alan wondered what he could ask from the Arachnne sisters that wouldn't seem inappropriate. Then, inspiration struck. Alan boldly requested a regular supply of their spider threads, thinking it was a reasonable demand that could prove useful in the future. The sisters, Neck and Ra, were visibly taken aback by the request, clearly not expecting such a practical demand. However, Silfie and the others were less than thrilled. Silfie, in particular, looked annoyed, her patience wearing thin. She demanded an explanation from Alan, her voice laced with frustration. Aura and Noel backed her up, their eyes questioning his motives. Alan suddenly felt cornered, the earlier goodwill evaporating in the face of their scrutiny. He couldn't help but wonder if the phase where everyone was being nice to him had abruptly ended, leaving him to fend for himself once more. Ra figures Alan is just a typical guy after all, so his interest in the female slaves makes total sense to her. Meanwhile, Silfie is having a full-blown crisis. She can't understand why Alan is cutting deals for spider threads while treating her like a piece of furniture. She's supposed to be an ancient elf, the literal embodiment of beauty, yet she feels like she's losing to a spider. This is frustrating her to no end. Noel isn't doing much better. She's fuming that Alan can keep his cool in front of a demon lord's commander but barely pays attention to them. It makes her feel like they are the problem. Aura, though, is totally into it. She's convinced this is some high-level romance strategy to make them jealous, thinking not even she would have the guts to pull a move that extreme in front of an audience. Of course, Alan is clueless as always and has no idea what he just walked into. That's when Neck drops the bomb. Apparently, in Arachnne culture, asking for someone's thread is basically a marriage proposal. Before Alan can even process that, Ra shuts it down. She tells him they just met and suggests they start as friends. Alan stands there waiting for his slaves to roast him for getting friend-zoned by his own kidnapper. Fast forward a few weeks, and Ra shows up at Alan's place. She's fully recovered, though she lost her magic eye ability in the process. But she's got the goods, a massive, heavy bundle of thread. Alan looks back and finally pieces together how this whole mess started. He figures Neck and Ra must have been living in the hills right behind the monastery the whole time. They probably got suspicious of all the sudden noise, sent a little spider scout to investigate, and spotted him using his restoration magic. That's when Neck decided to go rogue and kidnap him, all for the sake of her little sister. Honestly, Alan finds that kind of sisterly love pretty touching. Of course, the goddess just has to chime in and ruin the moment. She mocks him, saying that if his memory and body stats weren't so pathetic, he could have handled the situation way more efficiently. Alan literally has to beg her to stop roasting him. Now, things have settled into a nice rhythm. Alan and Ra have a spirit contract in place based on trade. As long as they keep the peace, the Arachnne sisters won't use force, which allows Alan to heal Ra's eyes and legs. It's a solid deal. They get top-tier Arachnne thread once every quarter, plus a massive shipment of regular thread from the subordinate spiders, all in exchange for food. Alan is pretty stoked about the arrangement, mostly because he gets to see the beautiful sisters regularly, as long as Silfie is cool with it, of course. Just then, Noel wanders in, checking if the thread delivery is done. She spots a baby spider monster and immediately asks if she can feed it. Ra gives the green light, and Noel happily tosses it some fries, getting totally lost in its gem-like eyes. It's funny because Alan remembers how hesitant the elves were about the spiders at first, but now everyone has chilled out, and they actually like the little monsters. It's a pretty peaceful scene, and Alan enjoys just sitting back and watching it all unfold. Then Ra asks Alan about his feelings toward their boss. She means Silfie, the ancient elf who is basically walking perfection. Ra points out that Silfie completely misunderstood the whole marriage proposal situation. Alan tells her not to sweat it since he already cleared the air, but looking back, it was a hassle. He had to desperately explain that he only wanted to share the threads, nothing else. Silfie didn't look thrilled about it, but he somehow scraped by without a major incident. Since then, though, Silfie has been buried in work. She started reassessing farming efficiency and even suggested breaking away from the merchant guild. Alan is actually pretty worried about this shift in her attitude, especially after he overheard her muttering that she couldn't stay with him if things kept going like this. The thought of Silfie becoming independent and leaving him creates pure terror in his heart. He feels like a total deadbeat and is stressed out about getting dumped. He knows he needs to do something to win her favor again. Luckily, he has a few backup plans up his sleeve. Just thinking about the prototype he's been working on makes his heart race. Ra watches him zone out and asks Noel if he's always this spacey. Noel points out that Alan's expressions are always so lively, and Neck has to agree that he is an interesting boy. He might be terrible at combat, but his mind is sharp. She is honestly amazed that he managed to negotiate a thread deal with them. Despite being human, he has this way of making everyone around him devoted, creating a trust that totally erases the barriers between races. Neck figures Ra has taken a liking to him too, though she can't help but wonder if that was all part of Alan's plan from the start. Suddenly, someone interrupts to ask Neck why she is in such a good mood. It's Kyubi-chan, the demon lord of lust. Neck tries to play it cool, claiming she is just her usual self, but Kyubi insists she spill the details. Neck admits she found an interesting man and casually asks if the demon lord position is still vacant. Kyubi stares at her intently, intrigued that Neck found someone so charming, and demands to know more. When Neck explains that the man is a human, Kyubi's interest skyrockets. She mentions she hasn't been with a human man yet and starts reveling in the idea of Alan satisfying her needs. She decides she wants to test if he is worthy of the demon lord position, thinking Alan's luck is about to turn around in a big way. Meanwhile, Silfie is lost in her own thoughts. It has been a while since Alan bought her, yet he still manages to surprise her constantly. Even now, he remains a mystery with a depth she just can't figure out. He always acts like a sleazy, third-rate guy, basically the enemy of women everywhere, but then he turns around and does things that weirdly stir up her maternal instincts. Alan is over there playing Jenga with one of the slaves, showing off his skills without using a lick of wind magic. Silfie thinks that is pretty amazing. She admires how much the slaves seem to like him and is constantly surprised by how well he treats everyone. She has to interrupt the fun to report on their income and expenses, though. While the others wait, she flips through her ledger. She wants to start with the rights to the entertainment products, but honestly, her mind is totally occupied with thoughts of Alan. He doesn't exploit them or try to control everything. He could have been rich and powerful, but he basically handed them their freedom. She realizes he played those games with them just to free the slaves without hurting their pride, meaning he never intended to win in the first place. She figures he must be testing their autonomy, seeing how they operate without him. She isn't sure if it's calculated or if he's just holding back. Recently, he even set up accounts for Noel and Silfie and gave Silfie full responsibility for the village funds. It surprises her that he keeps an account for every single slave. It shows he has high expectations for them, which makes her really happy. Then, out of nowhere, Alan asks if they can increase the slave payments by 5 times. 5 times? Silfie thinks that is absolutely insane. Alan gets a little nervous about his own generosity and suggests maybe scaling back the raise to just 2 or 3 times instead. Silfie knows 5 times is actually totally doable since their jam and potato chip sales have skyrocketed. And let's be real, the current wages are pretty low anyway. But the real surprise comes when Alan tells her to cover all of Noel's crafting costs without worrying about the budget, even offering to drain his own personal account if necessary. Silfie is a bit worried, but she agrees since he seems fine with it. Honestly, Alan remains totally unpredictable, kind of like his raging hormones. Even when he was kidnapped by the Arachnne sisters with no way to fight back, he didn't show a shred of fear. Instead, he bought time, negotiated for everyone's safety, and somehow flipped the situation to snag a spider silk deal. Silfie is just floored by his skills. She leaves the room, slamming the door behind her, but she can't stop thinking about him. She wonders why he didn't blame her or the others for the kidnapping. He shares profits and genuinely values them, which makes her feel like she isn't doing enough to deserve being by his side. She realizes Alan's potential basically makes him a king already. She knows she can't get complacent just because he trusts her, so she vows to double down on crop cultivation and fundraising. Meanwhile, Alan is hanging out with Ra and Noel, dusting off some old machine. Alan lets out a sneeze, and Ra is immediately checking if he's okay. Noel steps up with some wind magic to blast the dust off the equipment in the corner. Boom, there it is, a fully functioning weaving machine. Alan starts lecturing them on how this thing turns thread into clothes, claiming that a good outfit makes a girl twice as cute. Of course, in his head, he's thinking he'd happily give an arm and a leg to see them with 0 clothes, but he keeps that thought to himself. Turns out, he actually studied fabrics in his past life, so he's ready to flex that knowledge. Suddenly, a bunch of slaves barge in. Alan tells them they did a good job, but they just look confused, so he starts patting their heads to smooth things over, secretly praying nobody snitches to Silfie about him handing out free affection. He gives Noel a pat too, just to be safe. Ra gets super hyped and promises to bring him even more thread. Alan takes a second to think about the massive pay raise and budget he just gave Silfie, wondering where exactly that road is going to lead. Meanwhile, the slaves are dying to try the machine. Alan shows them the ropes, but deep down, he just wants to wrap this up so he can finally get some action. The slaves are naturals, though. They use their magic to speed up the process, and in no time, they've made this smooth, sparkling cloth that totally mesmerizes Noel and Ra. The next step is turning that fabric into actual clothes, but Alan admits he's still figuring that part out. Ra enthusiastically volunteers to handle it. Alan starts trying to teach her, but the goddess pops into his head to roast him immediately. Teaching a spider girl how to weave is like trying to teach the Buddha how to preach. Savage. Alan ignores the roast and tells Ra what kind of outfit he wants. Just then, Silfie gets back, and Aura grabs her hand, dragging her over to see what the master has been cooking up. As Silfie steps into the machine room, she catches Alan in the zone. Aura immediately hands her the new clothes, telling her that since she's been busting her back working so hard, she deserves the very first outfit off the loom. Silfie literally can't contain her happiness. She starts tearing up and thanks Alan for the gesture. But then things take a turn when Alan says he wants to see her wearing it right now. She can't really say no, so she puts it on and damn, she looks incredible. Silfie loves the texture of the dress and praises the quality of the Arachnne thread, while Alan tells her she looks great. He calls it a China dress, thinking the style suits her perfectly. Silfie thanks him, but she notices his eyes are completely glued to her thighs. He is totally enchanted. It makes her feel a little shy, but she realizes it's been a hot minute since he looked at her like that. so she starts thinking maybe she should wear leg-revealing outfits more often. Just then, Neck crashes the party, saying she's there to pick up Ra. Ra tells her she didn't need a pickup, but Neck ignores her and turns to Silfie, saying she needs to have a word with her. Silfie agrees. Meanwhile, Alan is spiraling in his own head, realizing that Silfie in a china dress is basically a weapon of mass destruction. He feels a little embarrassed remembering how passionately he explained the design to Ra earlier, specifically demanding deep slits and a tight silhouette. Right on cue, the goddess pops up to roast him about how suspiciously perfect the fit is. Alan tries to play off the perfect fit by claiming he has a specific skill that lets him measure body stats right through clothes, which definitely doesn't sound suspicious at all. But Silfie ignores the excuse and drops the hammer. They had a meeting, and it's been decided that starting today, Alan is forbidden from leaving the monastery ever again. Alan is in total shock. He is basically under house arrest now, and he is scrambling to figure out what exactly the girls discussed to make this happen. Turns out, a few moments earlier, Silfie had a serious sit-down with Neck. Neck told her to chill out because she just wants to get along, but then she dropped a massive bomb. There is a real possibility Alan is going to be recommended as a candidate for Demon Lord. Silfie froze. Since Neck works for the Demon Lord of Lust, this is serious business. She knew Alan's chaotic actions were causing a stir, but she didn't expect the Demon Lords to be watching this closely already. Silfie asked for clarification, but Neck suddenly grabbed onto her, catching her off guard. It turns out Neck wasn't attacking. She was obsessing over Silfie's outfit. She wants the dress. She loves the smoothness, the texture, the shine. She is hyped that their spider threads turned into something this high tier. She offers a trade. She wants in on this fashion tech that Alan and the dwarves cooked up. In exchange, she proposes a Holy Spirit contract that would grant them access to the forest territory. Depending on the conditions, she's even willing to sign over full ownership. Silfie finds the whole thing a bit suspicious, but she keeps listening. Neck sweetens the deal by offering an extra service: 24/7 surveillance on Alan using spider monsters equipped with heat and vibration detection. Silfie has to admit that sounds pretty appealing. Originally, she was just going to slap together a wind magic barrier, but adding the spiders would make their security system practically indestructible. She remembers how helpless they felt when Alan got snatched up, so preparing for the worst feels like the smart move. Still, she wonders if this is too good to be true. Neck explains the harsh reality. It's not just the demon lords who have their eyes on Alan. The heavy hitters like the Sage, the Sword Saint, and the Hero are all watching the demon lord's movements. If those guys decide to attack the forest directly, the spiders won't stand a chance. That's why Neck wants to borrow Alan's power when the time comes, especially since Ra has a habit of acting reckless. Neck seems totally obsessed, but Silfie gets it. Even if her methods are a bit shady, Neck is doing this because she cares about her sister. Neither of them would hurt people without a reason, and Silfie realizes that Alan saw through that right from the start. Silfie agrees to bring the offer to Alan, though she makes it clear the final call is his. Neck is cool with that, but begs her to keep Alan from wandering around recklessly. Silfie is on the exact same page. With a demon lord making moves, the adventurers in the Imperial capital are going to be running wild. Even with bodyguards, letting Alan go out right now is just way too risky. Silfie decides enough is enough and tells everyone that Alan is officially grounded. She forbids him from going out unless it is absolutely necessary, which is basically house arrest since they have that fancy surveillance system now. She figures Alan is smart enough to understand why they are doing this, but when Alan hears the news, he starts sweating bullets. Noel, Aura, and Ra all nod along like this makes total sense, but Alan is completely lost. Then Silfie drops the hammer and says he needs her direct permission if he wants to step foot outside. Alan's mind immediately goes to the gutter, assuming they think he is going to use his new clothes-making powers to commit some perverted crimes just to satisfy his eyes. But Silfie shuts that down and tells him someone is actually targeting his life. Alan figures it's because he's a pervert, but nope. It turns out the demon lord of lust is interested in him and wants a meeting. Alan realizes Neck must have spilled the beans about his restoration skill. He starts kicking himself for not putting a gag order in their spirit contract. He knows his restoration is cheat level, but his combat skills are trash, so if he gets into a real fight, he is going to get exposed as a weak freeloader instantly. He is stressing out about the danger, but then he realizes that if it is the demon lord of lust, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Neck jumps in to explain that meeting her isn't a terrible idea since she works behind the scenes running brothels and stopping crimes. They don't say it out loud, but it definitely sounds like a win-win situation. Alan asks what exactly he is being recommended for, and Neck explains that inheriting the title comes with a unique skill. Alan immediately gets hyped, thinking he is about to stack another power on top of restoration and become a legend. But once he hears the details, he realizes it is a total scam. The power is just a subordinate enhancement skill that boosts Silfie and the others by about 5 levels. It is literally known as the weakest among demon lords. The goddess pops in to say it suits him perfectly, which stings a little. Alan says he has zero interest in the job. He tells them as long as he can eat, sleep, and get some physical contact through Reversi, he is happy. The goddess asks why his standards for living are in the basement. Alan explains that being a demon lord means dealing with politics and acting like a ruler, and he admits he is way too lazy for that. But the goddess suspects he has a bigger idea brewing, and she is spot on. Alan is secretly dreaming of building a massive integrated resort. We're talking hotels, malls, casinos, cinemas, amusement parks, and hot springs. Basically, a paradise for fun. But then reality hits, and he sighs, admitting it's totally unrealistic. The goddess agrees instantly, reminding him that he barely has the guts to support the 50 slaves he already owns. Alan practically begs her to help him get out of this. He knows if he takes the title, Silfie and the others will end up doing all the heavy lifting, and he doesn't want to drag them into his mess. He decides a boring, down-to-earth life is the way to go. The goddess tells him he has nothing to lose by bringing it up. She figures that a freeloader like him wanting to run a nation is such a joke that everyone will just laugh it off. Alan agrees, imagining his sister Mizuki roasting him and asking if he plans to be some kind of foolish lord. Since Neck and the others are there, he decides to drop the idea at dinner as a funny little what-if. Then the goddess disappears, but when Alan actually brings it up at dinner, nobody laughs. Everyone just stares at him in surprise. He starts panicking, realizing the vibe is way too serious, so he tries to backtrack and say he was just kidding. But Silfie grabs his hands and says, "Let's do it." Noel jumps in, saying it sounds tough but fun. To Alan's total shock, everyone is actually hyped about the idea. Aura grabs him from behind, declaring she will teach the women of the world the essence of beauty and fashion. Alan tries to act tough despite feeling the soft pressure on his back, wondering if she is messing with him. Silfie gets down to business and asks Neck if the demon lord of lust will visit personally. Neck confirms she will. Silfie decides they need time to prepare the best hospitality possible, so the demon lord herself decides to accept Alan's recommendation. Neck asks Ra if she is cool with that, and Ra says it sounds interesting, so she is in. Silfie says they need to start right away and tells Alan to decide the direction first, and that is when Alan completely freezes. Noel points out that Alan has officially passed out while standing up. He is totally stuck in a frozen state after that lucky pervert moment with Aura. Cut to the next morning. Sunlight is creeping into the room, casting a glow over Noel, who is curled up on the bed, looking super peaceful. Her hair is messy all over the pillow and she is out cold. Alan whispers that she looks as cute as ever. She finally wakes up, mumbling something groggy, and steps outside to stretch and let the cool air hit her face. That is when she spots her little spider buddy, watching her with those beady eyes like a tiny furry security guard. She chuckles, thanks the little guy for keeping watch, and gives him some attention. Noel runs through her mental checklist. She needs to prep the farmland for new crops today and tweak that new weaving loom too. Meanwhile, Silfie is staring at the clothes Alan gave her, feeling all warm and fuzzy inside. They are really nice and clearly chosen with care, but she decides to save them for later since she doesn't want to ruin them while working in the dirt. Noel realizes that out of everyone, Silfie is grinding the hardest to get close to Alan. She knows that when Alan talked about freeing the slaves, he didn't just mean cutting them loose. He wanted to build something that would make them want to stay even after they were free. Silfie understood that right away. He wanted to give them real power, not just freedom, and Silfie is determined to be a part of that. For now, they just have to trust Alan and see where this crazy ride takes them. Noel is sitting there, amazed at how fast Silfie figured everything out. The new dwarf girls fit into Alan's crew so naturally that it feels like they have always been there. But then Noel realizes something. If everyone gets the same praise, it kind of defeats the purpose. She believes the best results deserve the best rewards, so she decides to step up her game. She isn't just doing it for herself, though. She is doing it for Alan. He isn't just a leader to her. He is her savior, and she wants to make sure he has everything he needs. Then a funny thought pops into her head. She has noticed Alan staring at Silfie's legs a lot lately. She smirks to herself, thinking that if he is interested, he is welcome to stare at hers all he wants. The next day, Alan is sitting at his desk, acting like the master of the house in his usual casual way. The problem is, there isn't actually much for him to do. His office is basically just a decoration at this point, and he feels like he has become a background character in his own operation. But since productivity is skyrocketing, he figures maybe this is just his life now. Then Silfie hits him with a serious question. They need to decide what new plants to grow to entertain the demon lord of lust. Alan grabs a book, hoping to find some answers, but he quickly realizes it is an ancient human encyclopedia. The sketches are nice, but he can't read a single word of the text. This realization completely breaks him. He has a full-blown meltdown, eyes welling up and wailing dramatically, leaving everyone around him completely shocked. Silfie asks what is the matter. Alan whispers like it is the apocalypse. There is no rice. Since they need to grow something, they settle on sugarcane for now, which is good enough. Meanwhile, Alan is having a mini existential crisis about his own usefulness. The dwarves' earth magic is just way too good, making farming super efficient, so even when Alan tries to help, it feels pointless. He literally has nothing to do in the fields. Silfie tells him to stop wasting time and go back inside, but Alan refuses. If he can't work in the fields, he is going to find another way to contribute. Thanks to Noel's genius, they have a game-changing loom that restocks threads automatically, leveling up their fabric production. Alan swears his intentions are pure as he calls Ra over, but his heavy breathing over the clothing designs definitely looks suspicious. He excitedly shows off his sketches, underwear, blouses, skirts, sweaters, socks, the whole package. Ra is a little concerned and suggests maybe he should focus on regular clothes for everyone before diving so deep into personal designs. But despite the awkwardness, she respects his dedication to taking care of the slaves first, even calling it manly. The girls agree to make the clothes, clearly impressed by his determination. Later, Aura and Ra walk in wearing outfits that are clearly Alan's handiwork. They look amazing and even they seem impressed. Ra asks Alan if she can really take the clothes. She assumes the cost will come out of her salary, but Alan waves it off immediately. He tells her not to worry and to consider it a gift from him, saying he would be happy if they just accepted it. The girls exchange glances, nod, and thank him. Tina and Ellie chime in to say thanks, and Ellie mentions that she and Tina will be in his care again today. Alan just nods and agrees like the cool boss he is. Then Tina brings up the last match where Ellie basically ran away. But this time Ellie is begging the others to give it everything they've got. Alan smirks, thinking today is finally the day he captures the win. In his head, he is calling this a lucky pervert moment waiting to happen. He realizes he's been getting beaten down because his old-world strategies didn't work here. But after countless hours of eating, sleeping, and playing Reversi, he has unlocked a new level of gamer brain. He is convinced he can checkmate them even if he loses half his pieces. Meanwhile, the goddess is watching the whole thing and cracking up. She finds it hilarious that he thinks he is a genius even though he is playing with a massive handicap. Alan, completely oblivious, is sitting there thinking they shouldn't underestimate him because he was totally a child prodigy for like 5 minutes back in the day. Ellie sits there, ready to accept her loss and waiting for the village chief's orders. Ellie starts freaking out, crying to Tina and Ra that she is about to get defiled. Tina and Ra immediately shut her down, telling her there is absolutely no way that is happening. But just as Alan is lost in his perverted fantasies, someone calls his name. It's Noel. She walks in unexpectedly wearing that outfit, the one Alan designed. Naturally, Alan asks if she wore it for him. Noel just shrugs it off, acting super casual, saying she just finished work and decided to put it on. Alan is caught completely off guard. She looks amazing, way different from her usual work clothes, and honestly, she looks adorable. Noel asks if there is anything he needs. Before Alan can even answer, she pulls out an ear-cleaning tool, reminding him that he mentioned wanting one before. She had some leftover materials lying around, so she decided to just whip one up. Alan figures why not and decides to use it right then and there. Ellie takes over and starts carefully cleaning his ears, telling him to stay still. As soon as she starts, the sensation hits him hard. He realizes he has been neglecting his ears way too much. Ellie sounds slightly annoyed but also a little amused as she points out just how much buildup there is. Alan sits there barely holding it together. It feels super embarrassing but also weirdly enjoyable, making the whole situation feel oddly intimate and kind of hilarious at the same time. As things settle down, Alan takes a second to reflect. He realizes he got way too caught up in his excitement earlier and tells himself to slow down instead of rushing things. His mind drifts to his sister Mizuki, imagining her playfully reassuring him to save the best fun for last. But then his brain takes a hard left turn. He suddenly hyperfocuses on one specific goal. He really wants to see Silfie's panties. His determination is unmatched. He calls out to her, setting the stage for whatever awkward mess is about to happen. Out of nowhere, he asks Silfie if he can grab some sugarcane to make a new dish. She agrees and asks what he is making. Flustered, he mumbles something about a dessert to welcome the demon lord of lust. Silfie immediately perks up at that, thinking it's a great idea, but Alan is already distracted. He spots Silfie's stockings and starts wondering if she wears them all the time because she loves them or if it is just a lucky coincidence. Meanwhile, Silfie is running the show at the Arelfi Trading Company, and somehow it ends up becoming the top trading company in the entire imperial capital. At the same time, Aura's cosmetic business, Kazaidu, later rebranded to Mimi Kazaidu, is absolutely thriving thanks to those soybean-based products. Alan finds the whole situation hilarious. He never expected stockings and lingerie to be the secret ingredients for a massive business success story. But thanks to the Arachnne sisters, the lingerie sales are skyrocketing. They are even supplying the flower district run by the demon lord of lust, so business is booming everywhere.